All right, I'm gonna hand out a pre-test. This is something it's totally anonymous, so don't put your name on it. And there's not a right or wrong answer. We're gonna go through it all together. So I'm gonna just hand this down on the left-hand side, and so just take one and pass it on. Take one, pass it here, right. And we're gonna go through this together here. So again, this is an anonymous pre-test. We'll take one right now, and we'll take one at the end of the session. You're not being graded on this. This is just for us to figure out what we're doing right, what we need to change for next time. So today's date is December 17th, 2022. Where it says pre, you can leave that blank. And then it says, please circle the number that best represents your answer to each question below. A, I have used abusive, controlling, or violent behaviors towards a woman. 1 for strongly disagree, 2 for disagree, 3 for unsure, 4 agree, 5 strongly agree. B, women provoke men to be abusive, controlling, or violent towards them. 1 for strongly disagree, 2 for disagree, 3 unsure, 4 agree, 5 strongly agree. C, I have the knowledge and skills I need in order to make non-abusive, non-controlling, and non-violent choices. 1 for strongly disagree, 2 disagree, 3 unsure, 4 agree, 5 strongly agree. D, this class will increase the knowledge and skills I need in order to make non-abusive, non-controlling, and non-violent choices. 1 strongly disagree, 2 disagree, 3 unsure, 4 agree, or 5 strongly agree. So when you're done, you just go ahead and hand it again back to your left. I'll pick it up on the left-hand side.
All right, man, so we'll go ahead and get going here, Jen. So I appreciate that, man. Signing in, making sure that you're accounted for so you can say, hey, man, they told me to show up. I showed up. I was here. So thank everybody for that. A little tedious, man, because we got to make sure that we get everybody in here. So thank you guys again. Well, welcome you here to Domestic Violence Orientation. Let you know my name's Chris. I work for a program that's called the Tucson Vet Center. I don't know if anybody knows about that. It's a Department of Veteran Affairs program, which means that I work with vets, right? For people that have been in the military, primarily we've been deployed to like combat zones. And like one of the things that I do there is often have conversations with men about what we are going to talk about here today, which is our relationship to violence as men. Right? Like, what does that mean for us? Maybe how do we use it in our lives? How do we experience it, maybe, in our lives? What that means for the people that are closest to us, and then how do we work towards that being safer? Right? So hopefully that's some of the stuff that we talked about here today. Okay? Domestic violence orientation, for some of y'all coming on to, well, for all of y'all in here, coming on to probation, you have to participate in this workshop. It happens twice a month, right? It's the first Friday of the month. It's in the afternoon. I think it's from 1 to 4:30, and it's the third Saturday of the month, which is here today. So we're scheduled here today, man, from 8:30 to noon, right? So that's a long time. It sounds like a long time, but it goes by really quickly, okay? I see the I see the reaction right there, the kind of chuckle, right? And it does go by really quickly, man. But if we're gonna make the most out of our time here today, hopefully myself and Javi here can help guide the conversation that we hope to have. So those are the things that we want to try to touch base on and talk about today, okay? This is a workshop that is not only for folks on probation. This is community space, right? So sometimes we have people that participate in this workshop who are not on probation, who are not involved with the justice system, but want to learn more about, as men, what's our relationship to violence, how do we use it in our lives, maybe how do we experience it, what it means for us, what it means for the people that are closest to us, and again, how we like to be safer in response to that. Right? So we know that whenever we're talking about things like domestic violence, intimate partner violence, that can bring up a lot of stuff for us, right? Sometimes there's a lot of big feelings around that. Sometimes there might be some anger, betrayal, there might be some like hurt, sadness, there can be a lot of that kind of stuff. And we can bring that stuff into the room here today and just acknowledge that sometimes when we're talking about things like domestic violence, intimate partner violence, that's difficult to talk about. It might be stuff that we often never like talking about before. Okay? So just acknowledging that, man, and some of the difficulty with doing that. And we can also come from a place sometimes where we can start off with what doesn't apply to me as opposed to like looking for what applies to me. Okay? So I just want to invite all of you into this conversation and say, hey, if you start off from a place of like, how does the information being presented here today apply to me, then you can get a lot out of our time here today, and you can feel as if like, your time here is not wasted. Okay? So that's the invitation, man, that I want to offer to you guys. I'm going to try to make a commitment to do that. Javi's going to try to hold that space with all of us too, okay? I'm excited for you all to be here, man. I have these kinds of conversations in a lot of different spaces, not just here with probation, doing that stuff with vets over there at the VA. I've done that with folks that are NFL players, right? I've done that stuff with folks who are MLS players. I've got the opportunity to do that with collegiate athletes, NCAA folks. We've done that stuff at the University of Arizona with fraternity council over there, and just wherever men are at, we want to try to have conversations about this, because this isn't a conversation about, men's violence isn't a conversation for men on probation, right? It's a conversation for all men, okay? So wherever men are at, there's an opportunity for us to like have discussions and talk about it, because we often don't, right? But we're really familiar with it, okay? So we're familiar with this thing that we often don't talk about, and it's really difficult sometimes to like make changes, work towards being safer, because sometimes it's the water that we're swimming in, right? So again, I'm excited for y'all to be here, even if maybe some of you are not, right? It's early in the morning, man, right? It's a Saturday, right? Maybe you had a long week, man, and then you're getting up early and coming here, it's cold outside. So hey, there's a lot of difficulty with like being able to be here sometimes, okay? So I want to appreciate everybody for doing the things that they needed to do in order to be here. So sometimes that might be like work arrangements, sometimes that might be childcare stuff, it might be transportation, right? And trying to be here in this space, and that can be really challenging and frustrating. So thank you all for doing what you need to do to be here, okay? There's also maybe sometimes like there is a mandate for some of us being here today, right? Maybe this isn't, I'd rather not be here on a Saturday morning, but somebody's telling me, hey, you got to be here, and that can be really challenging to be present to, right? So I can bring some of that frustration here into the room, and if that's there for you, I just acknowledge it and then ask y'all to set it aside and engage in the conversation that we want to have, so we can try to get something out of our time here. Again, man, whenever we're talking about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, that's really difficult to talk about, because we often think about that in context of like some other person, right? Absolutely, right? Like it's not to say that there aren't people involved, but we're the ones that are here in the room right now. And the one thing that I know is that when I focus on myself and I do things different, then there's a chance for things to be different for me, right? And that's like a helpful place for us to be, and that's the place I want us to be, and I'm going to make a commitment to try to keep us there, and Javi's going to kind of do the same thing too, okay? Whenever we're talking about domestic violence, we're talking about intimate partner violence, we talk about the justice system, we often think about intimate relationships, right? So we think about maybe like boyfriend, spouse, whoever, right? But we know that that's not the only way that people get in trouble with the justice system for domestic violence. That could be somebody that I live with, right? So it could be like a roommate, it could be a family member, right? Doesn't necessarily mean like an intimate partner. And we're always talking in relationship to like our violence and what that means for like women and children, but we also know that not all men are in relationships with women, okay? But that doesn't mean that we can't all learn something about talking about our relationship to violence as men, okay? So that's just acknowledging that stuff too, that not everybody has the same experience that's sitting here in the room right now. 3 hours, man, sounds like a long time. It's not a long time. But what we don't have in 3 hours to really kind of go into everybody's like individual story, so to speak. If we did that, man, we'd be here a lot longer than 3 hours, probably, right? So we want to try to be really effective with our time. So the conversation that we're going to have, we're going to try to keep us on track. There's particular things that we want to talk about. There's going to be some topics, some questions, some opportunity for everybody here to kind of put their voice in the room. And I want to use our time effectively, so I'm going to make a promise to do that. I'm just going to keep us on track too. Anything else?
No, I can transition.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. So, as Chris said, my name's Javi. I work with Emerge Center Against Domestic Abuse. We have a partnership with Chris. And we're a nonprofit in the community that primarily focuses on providing services to survivors of domestic violence. So our mission as an organization is to provide the opportunity to create, sustain, and celebrate a life free from abuse. And so our organization has been around for many years, with many decades actually, providing these services to survivors in our community. Shelter services, advocacy services, clinician therapy services for survivors of violence. And starting about 10 years ago, leadership in our organization started having conversations with the community, asking what do we really need, what does our community need from Emerge to truly be able to celebrate a life free from abuse. And one of the things that came out from that conversation about 10 years ago was that if we were really going to change the conditions so that people could celebrate a life free from abuse in our community, what we really needed to do was address the root causes of violence in our community. That in a lot of ways, advocacy services, shelter services are necessary services for our community, for people experiencing violence. But in a lot of ways, that's just a Band-Aid covering up the issue. It's just plugging up holes in a sinking ship in our community. And what are we doing to address the violence that continues to happen in our communities? To truly make it possible for people to be able to celebrate a life free from abuse. And one of the things that came up out of that conversation was we need to engage men in these conversations. And to Chris's point, not just men who are on probation for domestic violence, but literally all men in these conversations. Now the question is why? Right? Why would we engage men? And the reason I'm going to offer is not because men are bad or men are inherently violent, but there is a reality that male violence is a prevalent issue in our community and in a lot of communities. So today we're going to be talking about male violence against women and children in particular. But as Chris mentioned, we know that not all men are in relationships with women. Some men may be in relationships with other men. We may not even be here for an incident that happened with another woman. Maybe it was a family member, our dad, a cousin, someone in the house, right? And so the conversation we're going to focus on is male violence against women, but it's more broad than that, right? So if we look at the rates of like homicide, right? The vast majority of homicides are committed by men, and often the victims of homicides are mostly men. If we look at the rate of suicide, far higher in men. If we look at mass shootings, 97% of mass shootings, I just saw a statistic yesterday, are committed by men. So whether we're talking about domestic violence or male violence in general, there is an issue. We are destroying ourselves and each other, and we're hurting women and children primarily. And so that's the reason we're engaging in this conversation, not just because we're here on probation, if we are, but because we really believe that we need to have conversations with all men in our community about this problem and issue. And so about 10 years ago, we started our men's education program at Emerge. And I got to go through that program in 2018 myself. It has changed my life in really positive ways. That class is about focusing on the ways that I have learned to be a man in my society, what I've learned from that, and the ways that I have used that teaching that have been really hurtful to the people in my life. And they also have not really been working for me. And so about 10 years ago, we started this program for men to be able to have these kinds of conversations with each other. And so Chris and I today, Chris is also has been involved in that program. Neither of us are experts in this work. We're not here to teach you guys anything that you don't already know. We're not good guys who have it all figured out. I am a man in this community who struggles with the way I have learned to be abusive and violent in my relationships. And I know that if I'm committed to stopping, to being healthier in my relationships, it's going to be lifelong work from here out to stop it. I've got 31 years under my belt of learning how to be in the world in one way. It's going to take at least that long to figure out another way. And so what we realized about 10 years ago is that we need a community of men who are willing to talk to each other about this issue of violence we're willing to be accountable for the ways that it shows up in our lives and have conversations with other men about like, hey, we need to do something about this. We need to change this. Hey, I think like the way that you're talking about your partner is like not okay. And we need to do that with each other. And the thing is that we like need each other's support to be able to do that. And so kind of the perspective and place we want to have the conversation from today is exactly that. Chris and I are just other men in this community, and we want to have this conversation in a particular kind of way. And there's a particular objective in that, right? And we hope that you can leave in sharing today with us the goal in ending male violence. And there's a function and reason as to why, and we hope we can get you on board as we go through this. Anything you want to add to that, Chris, before you move on?
Yes, sir. So guidelines for us here today, man. So we're gonna have a break here, man, probably around 10:30, right? We might get about 10 minutes or so. We'll let the folks over here, man, give you some instruction on how to do that. But that's where you'll get an opportunity to go to the bathroom, right? Get a drink of water, check messages, do all that kind of stuff. Okay. If you got cell phones on you, just ask you turn it off, put it on silent, vibrate, right? If you're checking your cell phone and it's pinging, getting notifications, doing all that kind of stuff, man. It can be really distracting for you and draw your attention away from the conversation we're having today, and you can be distracting to other folks. So just ask you to turn it off, put it on silent, all that kind of stuff, right? Kind of keep it away. Point made, exactly right. Hey, if it's difficult for you to do that, man, during the workshop here, just ask you to please turn it off, put it away. If you're unable to do that, man, we just ask you to come back and do the workshop at a different time, okay? It's real early in the morning here for some of us. Again, long weeks. We might be real sleepy right now, right? Sleepy is where I'm sitting there and I can't keep my eyes open, man, and my head's kind of doing that whole thing and I'm nodding off. Hey, if you're sleepy, take care of yourself, man. Stand up, come over here to the side of the room, gather yourself, all right? You feel good? Okay, come back and join us in the conversation. If you're sleepy and you're not able to stay awake, we're gonna ask you to stay, take care of yourself. If you can't do that, you're sleeping through the workshop, just ask you to come back and do the workshop at a different time. Participation, so the way that everybody gets credit for being here today is by participating. Okay, so participation looks a particular way. At some point during our time here today, we're gonna ask you if you could, man, if you wanna participate, raise your hand. Myself, Javi will call on you, ask you please just stand up, man, say your name, right, and then put in the room whatever it is you need to put in the room, okay? So that's the way that we get credit for participating. We're asking people to do that in that way for a couple different reasons. Number one, some of us here, man, maybe we're real comfortable with just kind of putting our voice and sharing how we think about things, right, and that's cool. But other folks like maybe not so much, right? So the idea of like shouting over other people and trying to get your voice in there and like kind of posturing, man, to make your voice heard. Hey, we're just gonna eliminate all that stuff, man. At some point, raise your hand. Myself, I'll be calling you, stand up, say your name, and then put your name in. Okay? Everything that people have to say in here like matters, right? So I want to give you time and attention to share whatever it is you have, man. Whatever thought you got, whatever opinion you got about the stuff that we're talking about here today, like put that stuff in the room, okay? Give me time and attention to do that. When we're talking about violence, sometimes we might be sharing that out loud for the first time, and when I know sometimes when I'm trying to exercise a thought and put it out there in the world, man, I don't get it right the first time, right? I'm trying to think out loud and find the right words to describe it, and that's like a difficult thing to do sometimes. So one of the things I want to ask everybody here is just be respectful of the stuff that people are sharing. Sometimes it might be big feelings, it might be big thoughts, big kinds of experiences, and you're trying to think out loud and put it together. So be respectful of the stuff that people are contributing. So that means no laughing, no snickering, no kind of side conversations. Just be mindful of the stuff people are sharing. We have difficulty doing that kind of stuff here, man. I'm asking, please, man, be respectful of the stuff people are putting in the rooms. If I can't do that, or I'm struggling to do that, just ask you to come back and do the workshop. And then lastly for us here, man, one of the things that's going to be really challenging to do is like focus on ourselves. Okay? Again, whenever we're talking about violence and we think about that often in context or relationship to somebody else, we always want to, I guess like a tendency is to always bring that other person into the room, but that person's not here. Okay? We're the ones that are sitting here in the room right now, and it's more helpful for us, I think Javi agrees, for us to focus on ourselves, because when I focus on myself, then there's a possibility again of things being different for me. Okay? So I want to try to be helpful to you all in that way and kind of keep us in that lane, and Javi's going to make a commitment to do that too. Okay? All right. think what we're gonna do now here, man, is we're gonna watch like a series of clips. There's a couple people that are in the video that I want us to pay attention to, right? There's a man in the video, and his name is Mitch. There's a woman in the video, and her name is Slim. And then there's a young girl as well. And that young girl, I think her name is Gracie, okay? So just be mindful of those folks that we're looking at here in this series of clips. And I want you guys to consider a question here, right? How do I relate to what I see Mitch doing? So think about that. How do I relate to what I see Mitch doing? So when we get done with this series of clips here, man, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about that question a little bit more, okay? All right, thank you, man.
Forever and ever.
You're safe with me, son. You're safe, and it's okay to be happy. We deserve it.
So, one of the questions that I asked, man, was how do you relate to what you see Mitch doing? Okay? When I give people an opportunity here, man, remember, ask you just raise your hand, call on you, stand up, say your name, please, and then how do you relate to what you see Mitch doing? Anybody want to start us off on that? There we go, but please, you stand up.
I don't relate to Mitch at all. Mitch is a monster.
What's your name, bro?
Alan?
Alan?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Alan. Remember, man, the question is how do you relate, not how you don't relate, right? It's a scary thing, man, to stand up in front of a bunch of people, man, and kind of put yourself out there. I get that, all right? But hey, just because it's scary don't mean it's dangerous. There's a lot of stuff that we saw Mitch doing, like in that video, right? So the question is, and this is for us here, man, taking kind of inventory of ourselves, how do I relate to what I see Mitch doing? Yeah, somebody please, thank you. Stand up over. Oh, thank you.
I could say in the past I've related to Mitch, trying to be the authority and the controlling person in a relationship when definitely when I felt things wasn't going my way, or I had done something as far as cheated and tried to reverse the role and play the victim, and then trying to control when I can see my child if things that turn that way. So I definitely have tried to control people or my exes from breaking up with me and things of that nature.
Your name?
My name is Gerald.
Gerald. Thank you, Gerald. So a couple things in here, right? So the piece about Mitch, I mean, there's a couple opportunities, Mitch saying, kind of, I make the money, I make the rules kind of my way, right? Kind of controlling that, making that happen. There's a piece there about, like, Mitch, with his children and, like, trying to see children and controlling the children, like that piece. And then you also said kind of like the infidelity piece that we see with Mitch too, right? Gerald, I hear you say, Gerald, kind of relating to those pieces, right? What we see Mitch do. Okay, very good. Thank you, Gerald. Somebody else.
Gabriel?
Gabriel?
When he said, if I can have you, nobody can, that kind of relates to the
Thank you, Gabriel. Right, I mean, Mitch said it very specifically, right? Like, if I can't have you, like nobody can or nobody will, right? And Gabriel said, I relate to that, as I said. Right? Yeah, we get to go.
I relate when I make all the money, make all the rules.
Very good. And your name, please?
Hunter.
Hunter? Yeah. I mean, Mitch said it very specifically, right? Hey, I thought you knew I make the money, I make the rules. Hunter saying, like, I know I said that, right? I relate to that. All right. Anybody else? How they relate to what they see in the school?
My name is James, and it's the same thing about the making the money and the controlling, because I wouldn't let her work in the first place, so I kind of control the situation by having the money in the first place, so I would same thing like that.
James, you said that?
Yeah.
So a couple of things, right? I make the money, I make the rules, and then James also kind of speaking to this piece, like, hey, I didn't let her work, right? So because she didn't work, I was in this position because I was making the money, right? Maybe like not justified in that. I make the money, I make the rules, right? Somebody else.
Name is Deshaun. Pretty much I relate by like the anger. I remember back in the day, like not too long ago, but I mean, I used to have a real bad temper. So like, it's not even just with like, female-wise, but just with anybody, it's just, I mean, snap out on certain things, so early in that type of way, but now it's actually gotten a lot better, so.
And you said Deshaun?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Deshaun, right? So like relating to, there's a couple of things there, man. We think about like anger being the feeling, and then we think about like the aggression being kind of the behavior, right? So when we think about it, we see Mitch, acting aggressively, right? Like at certain times, and I hear Deshaun saying like the anger, losing control of the anger, like acting aggressively relating to that piece, right? Thank you, Deshaun. Just jump in.
Juan, so I can relate in the infidelity, like justifying it, saying men have needs, stuff like that.
You said Juan?
Yeah.
Thank you, Juan, right? Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we see kind of Mitch doing, right, is like not being monogamous in relation, cheating, right? He's kind of getting caught on that, right? So then when he does get confronted by it, the piece about like, hey, kind of justifying it to like his partner, right? Like, hey, I'm a man has different needs, right? And Juan saying, like, yeah, I relate to that, I said that. You can just jump in, I think you have to.
Yeah, my name is Raul. I can relate to the part as far as like cheating and stuff, and then kind of being controlling at the same time. Wanting it my way or no, but it was either my way or no. So I can relate to that.
Awesome, thank you, Raul. Right? Yeah, the infidelity again, right? Relating to that because Raul said like I cheated. I was not monogamous in my relationship, and then it's kind of like my way or the highway kind of thing, right? Like I'm the one who's calling the shots now. So relating to that piece of what we see here too. Very good. So I know we're gonna keep us on track here, man. So I appreciate people, man. Like, how do I relate? It's not easy to be able to speak to that in a room full of a bunch of people that you don't know, right? But for people that are like willing to do that, thank you for doing it and opening up the conversation because like what we see here with Mitch, I think a lot of us, there's a lot of different things to like relate to. So I appreciate people looking for like what applies, man, and then like putting a voice in the room. So thank you guys for that.
Thank you, Chris. So what I'm gonna do, y'all, and I appreciate those who just shared, right? And in the work that we do, well, what Chris and I know, man, is that like sometimes I'm sharing something with him, like, hey, Chris, like I'm struggling with my partner in this like specific way is what happened. And then the way I'm sharing it, right, like I'm stuck in my own experience around it. And then there's also like how Chris understands and hears what I'm saying, right? So sometimes I share with Chris and he has feedback from me, like, hey, Javi, I think you're not considering like XYZ thing here. And I'm like, oh man, that's amazing. I needed to hear that, right? So we call that feedback, and we really need that from each other as men because we don't know what we don't know, right? We're at the center of our own experience, and a lot of times we believe like that is like the truth, right? And so what we do need is like feedback from other men to be able to see differently and learn what we don't know, right? So I have some feedback about what was just shared that I'm hoping I can share with you all. And if it doesn't land, that's okay. If it jams you up, that's not my intention necessarily, right? But sometimes that can be a good thing. And if it does land, like hang on to that too, right? But I'm just gonna like invite us to consider a few things here, right? So the first thing I heard us share, right? And I think it was it Alan? Yeah. So Alan shared, man, like I don't relate to Mitch. Mitch is a monster, right? And that's real. I want to validate that, right? This is like a movie, right? I know it's Hollywood. It's a little bit older of a movie. There's like dramatized music, right? And in movies, there's like villains. So I get that dynamic and like watching this and thinking like, man, Mitch is a monster. The first thing I'll say is domestic violence in Pima County, in our community, this is mild to what we see at Emerge Center Against Domestic Abuse. Oftentimes, we see men who have killed their partners at Emerge, right? And so this is mild. Is one thing. The other thing is, right, I'm gonna just go out on a limb and suggest that like we're not here because we cheated on our partner or controlled the money. Right? So when we say I don't relate to Mitch, what are we doing in there? What are we doing by saying that? Right? And that's a thing that we as men do a lot. I know I do it a lot too, right? Man, that dude over there, he's like crazy. He's a monster. This dude is like punching his partner, strangling his partner, trying to kill her. He is a monster. Over here, Yeah, like I've slapped her, but at least I never like punched her with a closed fist or strangled her. Maybe I'm this guy over here, I'm like, man, you slapped her? All I did was control the money and like cheat on her. Yes, I did it a lot. I like lied to her about it. It was really hurtful, but at least I never laid hands on her. And then this guy over here is like, man, you like cheated on your partner? All I do is just like shame her every time she doesn't want to have sex with me. And then I go and watch pornography. Right? I can go all the way over here. And I can put all these men between me, and at the very end there's Mitch. Right? And let me just tell y'all that whatever dude I am in this scenario, if I'm right here, my partner is not saying, thank God all he does is cheat on me once a week. Thank God he never punched me in the face. Thank God that's all he does. Hey, thank God he doesn't let me work. And I have to like stay here and be his servant. Thank God he's never like punched me in the face. That isn't the way that violence works. What I'm doing right here is hurtful all on its own. And a lot of times when I'm putting all these other dudes between me, all these imaginary monsters, what I'm doing is I'm able to sit right here, look at all those guys and say like, I don't have a problem with what I'm doing right now. I don't gotta look at this. And the thing I'll invite us to consider is like, what I'm doing right here is enough. It's hurtful. The other piece I hear us talking about is, you know, I think it was Gabriel, man. He talked about like, if I can have you, no one can. And I appreciate you like acknowledging that and taking responsibility. I've said those words out loud. You know, and I've said a version of that too to my partner at one point. And the thing about like those words, right, is like it sounds pretty innocuous, right? If I can't have you, no one can. But what does that mean really? Does that mean if I can't have you, I'm gonna kill you? Does that mean if I can't have you, I'm gonna kill myself? I mean, if I can't have you, I'm gonna kill myself, you, and our daughter? What does that mean? We kind of leave it up for interpretation, right? And there's a function in doing that too, right? There's a function when we kind of put those things out there in that way to kind of like let it be known without actually saying it, to put kind of fear on the table. So that, I appreciate us kind of like talking about that, bringing that up and bringing it into the space here. You know, the last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to transition us, Chris, unless there's anything else you wanted to add. But so I heard, I think it was Deshaun, relating to the anger, right? And what I heard Chris saying is like, hey man, like relating to the anger, I hear that, and then also at the same time, right? There's a difference between like anger, which is a feeling, right, or something I might emote, an emotion. There's a difference from feelings, emotions, and then like actions, right? It's possible for me to feel angry and be nonviolent. It's possible for me to feel angry and not hurt someone else, right? And so the thing about feelings, right, is feelings are like, we can't control that. That's just information. It happens in our bodies. My choice to use violence is a choice, right? So if we could separate those things out. My feelings don't make me do anything, right? I have feelings, and sometimes I make choices based on those feelings, right? We're going to talk more about that later today, but I just want to kind of put that on the table for us. So the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to transition us, and no one mentioned that, right? But thinking about Gracie in the video. Gracie's the daughter. She witnessed a lot of what was going on between Mitch and Slim, right? I see his brother, he's like nodding his head, yes. Right, so we saw that. And maybe some of us relate to like having these kind of incidents in front of our kids. Right? Maybe we don't, right? But that's something that a lot of times we can overlook when we're thinking about these kinds of things, right? It's like, what is the experience that Gracie is having in all of this? What is she seeing, hearing, learning about what she's seeing her parents do? What she's seeing happen to her mom? So I want to ask us a question as we move forward. And so the question I want to ask us, and then before we even put our hands up, the question is, how many of us witnessed violence against a woman, whether it was our mom or another significant woman in our life growing up, from our dad or another significant man in our life. So how many of us witnessed violence towards a woman in our life growing up from a man in our life? Raise your hands. Okay, look around, y'all. Keep them up. That's a lot of us. That's like the majority of us in this room. Let me just say that Chris and I, we do this workshop. Emerge does this workshop, as he said, twice a month. Every month. It's the exact same thing every single time we do this workshop. The majority of us raise our hands and we have an experience of violence to share. So what I want to ask of us, those of us that raise our hands and are willing to, I want to ask us, what was the first time you really remember an incident of violence happening toward a significant woman in your life? So just like put yourself there for a second. How old were you? What happened? What did it feel like to watch that happen? What feelings came up for you? What did you do? So those of us that are willing to respond, I'd like us to respond to those questions. So how old were you? What were you feeling? So again, if you just want to share, put your hand up, share your name, and then how old were you, and what happened? Can I get you to stand up?
Kevin,
Kevin.
as far as I can remember.
Thank you, Kevin. And Kevin, man, are you willing to stand up again, brother? So I hear you saying, as far as back as you can remember, you remember violence happening toward a significant woman in your life. Is there like an experience that stands out to you as like maybe the first time? No?
Try to forget it.
Are you willing to share like any experience?
I don't want to try to forget it.
Well, Kevin, I appreciate you sharing this, man. And that's real, right? Sometimes we can just share what we're able to share in this moment, and that's okay, right? I see this brother over here wanting to jump in. So again, how old were you? What happened? And then what did you feel?
So I state my name, right?
Yeah.
So Gio. I was about 7, 8, around that area. The violence I was seeing in descriptive detail was like a fight broke out, disagreements were happening. Obviously, you know, with my mom, it was with my mom. My mom didn't really like hearing what she was hearing. So, I mean, like, she kind of like threw a punch. But, you know, like you said, we all make decisions at the end of the day. He decided, you know, oh, you're gonna throw a punch? And I mean, I'm just witnessing, I'm in the driveway just throwing some toy cars, and I got a pit bull next to me, and I can witness this, and all of a sudden, like, he throws a punch back, he flings my mom from the back of she gets like the refrigerator, back of the head hits the refrigerator. I see my mama crying there, so I go in and like investigate, like technically, and I'm just like, she's crying. I'm only like 7, 8. I can't really do nothing other than like be there for my mom. So like all of a sudden, as the situation gets like more intense, he's yelling at me, which I didn't even do nothing. And then after that, all I remember is his packing his stuff to go and he left me on the ground.
Thank you, Jill. Brother, can I ask you to stay standing for a second? I just want to hold space for like what you just shared with us. I think I'm good to take it for the 7 minutes. What did that feel like for you, brother? Just like watching your mom, presenting to your mom, your dad's packing up and stuff, all this was happening. What were you feeling in that moment?
I felt hurt. I felt hurt that, you know, a father's supposed to be someone you look up to, you know, especially like seeing my mama get hit, like that just made me want to go hit him, you know, but at the end of the day, like I was only 7 or 8 and I couldn't really do nothing other than to feel like I felt broken. I felt broken for my mom, so I'm just seeing her cry and I can't really like do anything about it other than like future wise, if I see something I could be, now that I'm older, I would be able to defend it.
Thank you, brother. I hear that. Like, I hear feeling hurt for your mom. know, and I feel like you wanted to like fight your dad, but also feeling like I can't do anything about it in this moment. Wanting to make you feel like helpless.
I felt helpless. I just felt like with seeing what I was seeing, like, you know, like this is my dad, like wow, like how, you know, just like how, and I'm mixed, so my mom's black and my dad's white, so seeing that, just like that shit broke me.
You know, I really appreciate you sharing this. It's a lot of leadership. Thank you. I want to ask us, you know, I hear Kevin sharing, I hear Gio sharing with us. Anyone else want to share with us an experience you had? How old were you that first time? Right, and then what happened? And what did that feel like?
So growing up, I witnessed violence. My name's Jonathan. Growing up, I witnessed violence between my parents. One of the first incidents I remember, I must have been like 2 or 3 years old, and they were fighting. There's a lot of shouting and stuff going on. I remember my dad leaving and my mom throwing something through the window, and she was just causing a rush in the house. I remember she punched the mirror. I remember seeing her hand bloody. You know, I just remember little details too, like what was on the TV, like the lighting in the room. I remember small stuff like that. And I just remember too being on the couch, feeling like lost and helpless. And my dad comes back home and he's looking through the broken window, like, you know, what's going on? My mom, you know, like just that was like the first incident I remember.
What did that feel like?
Rough, man. It's hard, you know, and not realizing that impact that those kinds of things have on you until you're older, you know, and willing to work through all that. That's one of the hard things too.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm curious, like, you know, I was like 2, 3 years old when this happened. I experienced violence a lot, you know, growing up, and I imagine that might be like confusing too. That age, not really knowing what's going on. Thank you, Jonathan. Who else would like to share an experience? Let's get a couple more people. Alan.
I was maybe about 9, 10 years old. I was sitting at the kitchen table. My mom, stepmom, was going around the house. She was arguing with my dad, who worked in a department store, like a lady shoe salesman. She was always accusing him of women, this and that, contacting women. So cheating, basically. And she's my dad's sitting there in the kitchen, ironing his clothes for the next day. And he's like basically blowing her off, like, look, you need to go somewhere and chill out. You need to sit down, alone. She's just going ballistic through the house, throwing stuff in the kitchen, slamming doors every time she walks past him. She pushes him and then goes back in the other room, goes back, and the whole time he's like, look, keep your hands off of me, blah, blah, blah. You know, I told you it's working, blah, blah. And like I said, I'm sitting at the table and just screaming, going back and forth. So I guess the final time that, like, one of the final times she walks past him, and like the door going to the other side of the house is right here while he's ironing. She comes by, and when she comes by, she pushes his head too. So, and then she slams the door, and when she's going back to the other side of the house. So he gets up, and she slams the door, and it's like right in his face. He opens the door, and then she turns around when he opens the door, and then they start wrestling. And then she starts trying to hit and punch and everything like that. My dad just grabs her, and he holds her down. And she's just screaming and everything, let me go. And he's like, you need to calm the fuck down. You go run around the house slamming doors. My son's sitting in the kitchen. He just going ballistic, and then she's just in a rage. That was one of the first times my dad told me, like, if you ever in a conflict with a woman, never hit a woman, never slap her, but make sure you protect yourself, hold her down, don't let her hurt you or continue being destructive and harming the house and stuff like that. So yeah, I know that's kind of where that I have my own history with going after leaving me alone and getting it to you, and then feeling like you're pushed to a certain point, so like continues punching you, pushing you, and then you either just snap or, and then my own thing has always been.
Well, Alan, man, before you share about that, I just want to like focus on how old were you in that instance?
I was like 9 or 10. Yeah.
What did that, like, do you remember what you were feeling? Like watching your dad hold your mom down, like everything that was happening?
yeah, I mean, I'm watching everything, and like, I just thought it was just completely, I mean, she was just completely out of control, and then my dad trying to stay reserved and just like, hey, you need to chill out. Hey, you need to calm down. Hey, you stop your hands on me. Hey, go home somewhere. Hey, and then finally just continue to be aggressive. And I'm like, oh, she did it. And then, you know, he goes through the door, and then it's like slap and brawl and everything like that. So I'm just watching it like, oh crap. But,
So like, maybe feeling worried about what's about to happen.
no, I wouldn't. I don't think I was worried about what was happening. I'm just sitting there watching it unfold. I'm just, like I said, I wasn't worried about it at all, to be honest. Just, all right, we're fighting, and oh crap, you know, somebody, like she finally pissed him off, where, you know, she finally, it's only so long that he was gonna sit there and continue being hit upside the head or this and that. I mean, yeah, he could have got up, walked out of the house, he could have got up and left. You know, there's all these things he could have did, you know, while I just closed, get ready to work the next game.
But I'm hearing like part of that is like just waiting for the other shoe to drop, right?
Yeah.
Like this is gonna like escalate.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that with me.
Sure.
What do you think, Chris? I think I'm gonna spoke. Yeah. I appreciate those of us that took the opportunity to share. You know, and I heard we only had time for just a few stories, right? And trust that there's many more that if we had time, like we could continue to fill up the room with similar stories to what we just heard. I know Chris has similar stories. I have a similar story that we can share, right? And the thing is, right, is what I heard us saying, you know, is that watching that, whether we were 2 years old, 3 years old, might have felt like really confusing, right? Maybe it felt like really scary, right? We were worried about our mom. We were worried about what our dad was gonna do. We were worried about like, how is this gonna end? Right? When I heard Gino say, man, is like, I like wanted to fight my dad. You know, maybe some of us who grew up with that long enough, for a long enough time, maybe like we actually fought our dad at one point. Right? And maybe what happened at that point is like the violence stopped. Right? So if here I am, right, like 2, 3, 7-year-old boy, 9-year-old boy, having these experiences, and I'm feeling helpless, I'm feeling worried about my mom, I'm feeling maybe responsible for my mom's safety, whether that's like worried about what my dad's gonna do to her, or just wishing that she would calm down so that dad doesn't do something hurtful. Right? I feel responsible for my parents. I feel worried about their safety. I feel afraid maybe for my own safety. And the thing about that, y'all, is like, that isn't a normal, healthy childhood experience. As children, the only thing we're supposed to be responsible for is being a child. We have caretakers who have a responsibility to like take care of us, to protect us from some of these things, right? And the thing is that like we were let down. I just want to say that out loud. There's a generation of men who have let us down. And it's okay to acknowledge that. And acknowledging that doesn't say that our dads or that man in our life weren't trying hard. Right? There I am, that young boy having these feelings. And what do I do with that? Those are big feelings to be having as a little boy. And then one day I fight my dad. I get mad enough and I fight my dad and the violence stops. And what I'm learning there is, hey, if I'm feeling unsafe in a conflict situation, in an escalated conflict situation, what works is not feeling helpless, worried, afraid, responsible. What works to make me feel safe is when I get angry enough that I can use violence to get it to stop, that I can control this situation and shut it down. Maybe what that means, in some ways, is if I haven't healed from that, if I haven't looked at that in a really like intentional kind of way, then maybe like here I am an adult man many, many years later, and I have a warped relationship to control and violence in my life. Then like maybe when I'm in an argument, in a conflict situation with my partner, what safety for me looks like is taking control, shutting it down. Because that was an unsafe situation when I was little. So let me just ask us real quick, how many of us have kids of our own? Look around, it's a lot of us. Let me ask another question. How many of us, when we were little, had those experiences where we saw that stuff happening and we told ourselves, man, when I grow up, I am never going to live my life this way. I will get as far away from this as possible. Yeah. How many of us have had a moment when we were like, oh shit. Somehow, some way, this shit is still right here in my life. And if you relate to that, it ain't an accident. Let me tell you, it's not an accident. So those of us that have kids of our own, if we're just hoping that somehow, some way, they're going to get out of this, do we want them 10, 15 years from now to sit in a room like this one and have a thought like, damn, I really thought I was going to get away from all that. So the thing is, right, is it like those experiences that we had as little boys were not our fault. They were not okay. And it really hurts me to know that like we fill up rooms with adult men who a lot of times, this may have been the first time we have ever said something like this out loud. Those of us that didn't share, I really encourage y'all to find the opportunity to share it. Because these are things that we don't talk about. And yet, we talked about it as though it happened yesterday. Some of the things that y'all said just now sounded like they could have happened yesterday. So they are still with us. And how often as men are we like, man, I'm just living in the present. Fuck the past. I'm not talking about the past. Like, I'm just staying right here in the present. I don't got to go back there. Right? Yet we talk about it as though it's yesterday. Yet we get in arguments with our partner and it's right here. And so the thing we got to do and figure out how to do is, even though we weren't responsible for those experiences as little boys, here we are all these years later, adult men in the world, and when we don't heal from that, other people suffer. We suffer. And so if we want something to be different for the people we're in relationship with and for our kids, then we have to do something different. We got to figure out how to heal from those experiences, and that's really unfair. Let me say that. It's really unfair because we never asked for that. And it's really unfair because no one ever taught us how to heal from it. Probably no one ever sat us down and said like, hey, how did you feel about that experience? What did that mean for you? What did you learn from that? What are the things you're doing to heal from it and not pass it on to your kids? Probably we never had those conversations. And so what we got to do now is, if we don't want it to continue, it can't be an excuse for us either. Right? And so healing might look like, it can look a lot of different ways, right? But it might look like doing what we just did right now, right? Sharing it out to other people who are willing to hear it and can hold that with you, right? Other men. It's an opportunity to do that, right? And the thing is, like, when you do this with other men, especially in a room like this one, other men raise their hand and say like, oh snap, I've had that experience too, right? That's healing. Another thing, right, is like, I have a 1-year-old daughter. A good friend of mine recently told me a few months back, hey, like, the things you do for your children that you never got as a little kid, you're doing that directly, not just for your kids, but for the little boy who never got that either. You're doing that directly to him, right? So if I can have a conversation with my daughter, hey, I'm really sorry, and I want you to know that like what I said to your mom is not your fault. The ways I was showing up that night, I imagine were really scary, and I want you to know that's not your fault. Maybe we're just thinking right now, the dads in our dads or like the men in our life growing up, maybe we could never have even imagined them saying that kind of thing to us. And maybe the question we ask ourselves is like, what would I have needed from him in order to heal? And I can do that for my kids. I can do that for my partner. And that's really hard work though, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the day here. So I appreciate all of you who shared and for taking the opportunity to be vulnerable in this space. Anything you want to add? You want to transition this forward, please?
Yeah, I don't know, man. Something Alan was talking about, man, is like making me think about, like, I remember being in this situation, man, when I was younger and seeing, like, my mom experiencing stuff with my dad, seeing my dad doing things, man, yelling, screaming, you know, kind of stuff. But and then getting really mad at my mom for it, right? Like, man, why don't you just like leave me? I remember like thinking that, right? Like to my mom, and then like coming up with all these things about like it kind of being my mom's fault, you know, and like that really kind of resonated with me. And I remember like I was a freaking adult, and I was in the military, like I didn't want to go home because I didn't want anything to do with like those people. Right? And I remember being really mad and like blaming my mom, and then like, you know, kind of doing some of this work. One of the things that stood out for me was like, man, if I was willing to do that like, against my mother, like why not do that with this person I'm in a relationship with, right? Like this significant person like in my life, if I could like blame her for like the things that were going on, like why would I not blame this person that I just met and now I'm in a relationship with, and maybe now that I got kids with, right? Like I can do that in this real significant relationship, and like that was something that like I had to do, and like I think it took me a long time to actually start considering that. But like I'm not saying that's what you're doing, Alan, man, but there's something about blaming our mothers with this like feeling towards our moms that like is one of those things too that's there for us as a result of the choices that like adults are making like in our lives, right? And like if I'm gonna get out of that, like what Javi was saying, I gotta figure out how to heal from that and do that in a way where I'm not hurting anybody in the process. And that's the thing that seems like pretty unfair sometimes, right? But if I'm gonna work towards being safer, then I gotta do all of that stuff. I gotta put all that weight on my back. And that's not an easy thing to do, right? So just appreciate the struggle like in that kind of healing for us, man, that's out there. All right. So if we look here, man, we got a handout. There's like a big circle on one side here that says the power and control wheel. Maybe some folks got some familiarity with this. Maybe you've seen it before. If not, you know, the power and control wheel, where that comes from, man, is conversations for women having conversations with one another, basically, about the kinds of experiences that they're having in their relationships with like male partners, right? And when we talk about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sometimes those are the really big terms, man, that like we hear. So we know terms like physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse. Sometimes we're familiar with that stuff. But what are the actual behaviors that we know create risk in relationships? That's what that power and control wheel is, man. It's a graphic representation of the behaviors that create risk in relationships. And if we're gonna work towards being safer, well, then we need to know what the behaviors are that cause harm. Right? So Javi's going to kind of take us through that here. We're going to take a deeper dive into each one of these slices of the pie, so to speak.
Thank you. Okay, so as Chris said, man, what we're going to be doing is we're going to go through this wheel, that inside part of the wheel. And what I'd like for us to do is consider where in the video did we see Mitch using that behavior? Where in the video did we see Mitch using that behavior? And then as we read through these, if we're reading any of them and you're like, oh, I relate to that. I relate to using that. Just put a little star next to it. These are for you to keep. You're not going to turn it into us, but it'll help you out later when we get to a part in the conversation. If you just put a little star next to the ones you relate to. So let's start with intimidation. So can I get a volunteer to read intimidation? So you stand up, say your name, read intimidation, and then share an example of where you saw Mitch using intimidation in the video. Okay.
Leonard, intimidation. Scaring partner with looks, actions, gestures, body language, smashing things, destroying property, hurting pets, driving recklessly, displaying weapons, writing threatening notes or letters.
Thank you, Leonard. So is there a place or an example where you saw Mitch using intimidation in the video?
I seen like, you know, pretty much like his body language and also like, you know, he was also, kind of making, like, sub threats, you know what I mean? Like, oh, if I can't have you, no one will. Like, that's could be kind of a threat, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that would be intimidating.
Well, and I hear, so the threats piece we'll talk about a little later, right? That's a different section in the pie. So some of these might relate, right? But I hear that like those words can be intimidating. I also hear like the scaring partner with looks, right? And like there was different ways he was using his body language throughout the clips. And there was a moment when Slim was like confronting him about the infidelity, the cheating, and he's kind of like looking at her, right? Just kind of like making these different like gestures, right? Like that.
Yeah,
that
like
might be
when he was sitting at the table and he was like, so we're just telling our business out there. That's like intimidating. You know what I mean? So like,
yeah. So just kind of bringing up, right? Like you just putting our business out there, like that could be a form of intimidation.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's also one we're gonna look at here as well. So, but yeah, thank you, Leonard. I hear those pieces, right? Like those different pieces we do. I also think about like that part where it says displaying weapons, right? There's that moment when Mitch pulled out a weapon and pointed it at Slim's friends, right? Also a form of like intimidation. How about isolation? Yeah, back here. Oh, I'm sorry. Juan, were you gonna go, man, or do you wanna you do not have an example for this one?
No, I don't have an example.
Okay, I just saw you raise your hand, so I'll get you back here. Sorry?
I was gonna read it.
Yeah, if you wanna read it, man, go for it.
Isolation, Eric. Isolation, controlling what a partner does, who a partner talks to and sees, where a partner goes, limiting partner social and family involvement, criticizing and insulting friends and family, using jealousy to justify action.
So Eric, man, is there an example where you saw Mitch using isolation? Can I just stay standing really?
Oh, yeah, there's lots of moments in that video where he used isolation by singling her out and talking to
Yeah.
keeping her basically in the child.
Okay, yeah, right. So there's that moment when, like, that Leonard was talking about, right, where Mitch and Slim are having dinner after Slim went and talked to her friend at the restaurant about what was happening, and then as Leonard brought up, man, like Mitch says, did you have to go crying to the gang at the Greasy Spoon? Right, so just kind of like letting her know that he knows that she was talking to her friends about what he was doing, right, and kind of implied in there is like, don't do that, right, but also like, how do you know? Right, it raises a lot of questions. How do you know that like Slim was talking to her friend? Were you spying on her? Were you following her? Did like you find out somehow through the grapevine? Right, so a lot of different questions that pop up, and maybe like an impact of that is like Slim feels really isolated. Feels like she can't reach out for support from her friends and community. Very good. So how about psychological abuse? Who can read that one and offer an example? Gio, and then we'll come up after.
Psychological abuse. Psychological abuse, insult, criticisms, and name calling. Punishing partner for making mistakes. Convincing partner that they are crazy, unattractive, unlovable, inadequate, and ignoring feelings, thoughts, and concerns. Playing mind games, humiliating the partner, and making the partner feel guilty.
It's very good reading voice, Gio, man. Any example you're considering?
My example would be, so he did like when she was like, she finds the phone, she's insecure, a little bit, she's figuring out, she calls the girl and like, oh, trying to figure out, getting some answers. And then she finally goes and approaches him about that, and he kind of like, oh, that was me, trying to minimize the blame, knowing that he never did that.
Okay, yeah, so look at that part where it says convincing partner that they are crazy. Yeah, so there's all this stuff that Mitch is saying when Slim is confronting him about the cheating. And he's like, I'm a man, honey, maybe like men have different needs, right? And like Darcel completes that need, right? And so like kind of flipping the issue that Slim has with like, hey Mitch, you're cheating on me with this person. And Mitch is just kind of like, well, maybe that's like better for us. Maybe that's a good thing. And so Slim has to kind of like step back and be like, wait a minute, what? You're cheating on me. Are you sure that's a good thing? Right? And like maybe the impact of that is like, I feel crazy. I feel like maybe like my issue with this isn't actually an issue, maybe it's my problem, right? or right after where it says like convincing partner that they are crazy or unattractive, unlovable, inadequate. And think about like the impact of cheating on someone. An impact of that may be that my partner feels unattractive, that she feels unlovable, that she feels inadequate, right? So those are forms of like psychological abuse around ABC. Thank you, Gio. I appreciate you, man. How about minimizing, denying, and blaming? Who has an example of that one?
Christian, minimizing, denying, and blaming, shifting responsibility for abusive behavior, saying partner caused it, making light of the abuse, saying the abuse didn't happen, not taking partner's concerns about abusive behavior seriously. So when she like caught him the first time cheating, or when she like smoked the perfume, he like saying like we have different needs and stuff like that. So kind of just like blowing it off completely.
Okay, yeah.
Saying obviously I don't need to do something like that.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, so like when Slim catches Mitch the second time, she's like, I can smell her perfume on you. And he goes, we just had drinks, right? Minimizing, right there. I also think about, there's that moment right after Mitch punches Slim the first time, and he leaves the house, right? And he comes back and he knocks on the window. She opens the window, remember that? And then he says, hey, who are you calling? She goes, well, I was calling your mom to cancel. And then he says, love is a crazy thing. That's what happened here today. So like, love is a crazy thing. That's what happened here today. So love is the reason I punched you in the face, right? So like when we think about like minimizing, right? Like I'm minimizing the fact that I just like hit you, and I'm saying it was like because I love you so much. I don't like, love has us doing some crazy stuff, right? That's like a form of minimizing. So Gio, I see you wanted to jump in, man. I'm gonna keep us moving forward though, okay? All right, so economic abuse, who can read that one and offer an example of economic abuse?
You missed one, you jumped, using the
Oh,
children.
did I skip one? Thank you, man. Using children. Who wants to read using children and offer an example of that one? Over here, Alan.
Using children, physically, sexually, or emotionally using children. Using children to relay messages, using visitation to harass partner, threatening to take children away, making partner feel guilty about the children, criticizing partner's parenting. In the video, Mitch threatened Gracie by saying that by the end of the week, the cops will find drugs inside of her purse, the car, things of that nature, and he'd have custody of Gracie by the end of the week.
Yeah, and so thank you, Alan. I appreciate that, man. So Slim's friends are coming to the house to like take Gracie and Slim out of the house for her safety. And then Mitch, one of the things he does is like says to the friends like, hey, you can go ahead and take her, but they're gonna find drugs in Slim's bureau, in her purse, whatever. I'm gonna have custody of Gracie by the end of the week. So go ahead and do it, right? So maybe like saying that is a way of like using the children to be able to like keep Gracie and Slim at the house, right? There's like impacts to that. So thank you, Alan, I hear that. There's also that moment, right, where Slim and Gracie are on the run, right? And then Slim calls Mitch from a payphone and then puts Gracie on the phone. You remember that? You remember that scene? And Slim is talking to Mitch, right? And he's like, and then she puts Mitch on the phone, right? She clearly doesn't want to tell Mitch where they're at. And then the first thing that Mitch does, right, is ask Gracie like, oh, where you guys been? And Gracie goes like, I've been to Chicago, been all these places, right? When clearly Slim doesn't want to be found. And so like what Mitch is doing, he's like using Gracie as a way to get information about them so that he can find her, right? How about economic abuse? Yeah, go ahead.
Like one of those, that piece there says using children, man, is, you remember when they're in the house and the friends come in, he's got the gun and all that kind of stuff, man, and then the friend goes and like wakes Gracie up, she's like, look at your papa, right? He's out there like got this gun in everybody's face, and then all of a sudden he's kind of like, hey, right? I don't want Gracie to see that, right? And then when he's on the phone and she's like, oh yeah, dad, da 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 da, and he's like, yeah, where you been? She's like, hey, no questions, and he's like, look, bitch, she's my daughter too, right? Pop, 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 pop. So he's like got this piece for him where he can like show up and curse her out, put weapons in her face, do all these things, but when Gracie's there, he's like, good dad, right? And like, how many times, man, of like that happening where maybe for Gracie, she's like, my dad's cool, man. He's the nicest guy in the world, right? Like, no problems whatsoever. Maybe my mom's crazy, right? Like, my mom's the one that's like tripping out and doing all this stuff. So when I say like using children, one of the things maybe just to consider is that like me trying to show up and be like good dad, right? And then taking opportunities where I can, where like I'm harassing mom and terrorizing mom and threatening mom and doing all these kinds of things, right? Like what does that mean for like Gracie is like, it can probably be really confusing for her, and you might find Gracie in this place where she's kind of like, you know, maybe my mom's like the problem here, right? So just thinking about that piece too.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that, man. How about economic abuse? Gio.
Economic abuse?
Well, actually, Gio, I'm sorry, man. I see Jonathan wanting to jump in. I don't think we got him yet. You already had a chance to do your reading voice, brother, so I just wanted to get Jonathan in.
Economic abuse, preventing partner from getting or keeping a job, forcing partner to work, taking partner's money, not allowing partner access to family income or financial records, giving partner an allowance, treating partner like a servant. There's a part in the movie where he says that he makes all the money, so he makes the rules. I think that's kind of like a form of using money as a control tactic.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. So like I make the money, then like I get to make the rules of the house, right? So that might be like one way. We see that portion at the end where it says like treating partner like a servant. Right? We don't know exactly if that's what Mitch is doing, but there is that moment, right, where Slim is like, hey, you've got it pretty good, huh? You like go out and sleep with different women, and I sit here and I like take care of your house, right? So like clearly there's something there for Slim that's like, hey, like you're treating me like a servant, right? Like maybe there's like an impact of like what Mitch is doing in the relationship, like for her. How about entitlement, Gio?
All right, entitlement. Entitlement is treating a partner as inferior, using differences against partners such as education, wealth, politics, class, privilege, immigration status, race, ethnicity, gender, physical ability, or history of trauma, demanding that their needs come first.
Very good, man. Thank you. Do you have an example of where Mitch used that entitlement in the video? Can I ask you to stay standing? And the reason we ask people to stay standing is not to be jerks, but it is, as Chris was saying at the beginning of the workshop, right? Sometimes as men we want to like drop something and then like come back over here, but we're taking leadership on this, right? And the thing is too, is that like, Gio, what you have to say matters, and we want to leave space and afford it to you. And so like that's why we ask you to stand up.
So the entitlement, I mean, obviously in the video, you obviously see that, you know, I'm a man, I mean, all that. But also, like, in that video, I mean, the first words, like, I mean, he even says it right here, my needs come first, he said. Like, what about her needs? And, you know, that he put himself first, which is the entitlement.
Yeah. So that piece, right, where he's like, men have needs. And maybe, like, Darcel completes that need. Like, what he's doing there is, like, using his male entitlement. Right, like I get to do this because like that's what I want to do as a man, even if it hurts you as like a woman in this relationship.
But that would be his belief.
Yeah, absolutely, right. That's his belief. And there's a way that like in our society, which we'll talk about later, right, that like he gets to do that. He's got money, power, he's got the house, he gets to do that in our society, right? Like that may be his belief, and there's like a society that backs that up for him, right? So I hear that piece about like using his like privilege as a man. That's what we're talking about there. I'm also thinking about where it says like, and thank you, brother, you can sit down, man. I appreciate you. So where it says like class privilege, immigration status, race, and ethnicity. So there's that moment, right, where Mitch or Slim's family, Slim's friends are trying to like take Slim out of the house. And one of Slim's friends, you know, she wakes up Gracie and she says like, hey, we just want to take Slim and Gracie, we'll be out of here. And then Mitch pulls him over and he says, hey, I don't want to say this in front of the rest of the group, but you're just a rug here. Right? The lights are still out. I can't see you. I can still kill you free and clear. Cops show up, who are they going to believe? What he's implying by that, right, is like, hey, you're this brown man. I'm this white man. You're in my house, my big house. I have a lot of money, a lot of power. Who are they going to believe, right? So like what he's using there, right, is when we think about like class privilege, race privilege, right? He's using that as a way to like hold power in that situation. How about coercion and threats? Who can read that one and offer an example?
Coercion and threats, threatening to leave partner, harm partner or loved ones, stalk partner, destroy possessions, hurt pets, commit suicide, report partner to welfare, making partner drop charges or do illegal things.
Can I ask you your name?
Hunter?
Hunter. So Hunter, where did you see Mitch using coercion and threats in the video? Did you see that?
Actually it didn't. I don't recall.
That's okay, Hunter. Anyone else have an example where Mitch used coercion and threats in the video? Jared.
Yeah, when he came, when I guess she had left, and I think he had killed the other guy that she was with, and he was choking her, and he was like, "I want you back." And then the daughter had put in his ear and saying, "Stop that, stop that," and he pushed the daughter. That was one. The rest when he pulled the gun out on the people. Yeah. And they were using, trying to leave. There were several parts throughout those.
Yeah. So there's that. So there's the moment when Mitch pulls out the gun and points it at everyone, right? Which I'm hearing like that's a threat. Yeah. When you think about like threats to harm partner or loved ones, like that's a threat. And I'm also hearing right at the end when Mitch finds Slim and Gracie, like he's saying some things, right? He's talking about like maybe the new boyfriend, and he's saying like, hey, you're gonna be like fishing for his guts out of Lake Washington. Right? He's not saying like, hey, I'm gonna go kill your boyfriend. But he's saying, he's like making like a graphic statement about his boyfriend or like the new guy, and probably the implication there is like a threat, right? But it's vague. It's not like a direct threat. There's also, he says there, or at the beginning of the clips, right? Like in that moment when he knocked on the window, and Slim opens the window and he goes, love is a crazy thing, right? And then he goes, I can't, I won't, I refuse to live without you. What does that mean? Right? He says like, I think you know what that means. But in my mind, I'm like, I don't know exactly what that means, Mitch. Does that mean like you're gonna kill me, Slim? Does it mean you're gonna kill yourself? Does it mean you're gonna kill our entire family? Does it mean you're gonna kill like my boyfriend, a new boyfriend if I ever leave you? He just kind of leaves it up for Slim to figure out. He says like, I think you know what that means. Right? So when we think about like the impact of a threat or a veiled threat in that way, like that can mean a lot of different things for Slim. Right? And there's like a specific impact that can have like when someone like tells you. Anything you want to add to any of this, Chris, or should we take cool. So we're gonna take a break, y'all. How many of us need a break? A little bit. Okay. So we're gonna take a 10-minute break. It's 10:19. So if we could all be back, should we do 11 minutes just to make it even? Be back at 10:30. All right. We'll be back in 11 minutes at 10:30. The POs are gonna give you some instruction.
All right, we'll get going over here, gents, okay? So if you look we're gonna keep looking at that power and control wheel, right? So we went through all those individual slices on the pie, right? And again, it's really how, if we're gonna learn how to be safer, man, we need to know the behaviors that create risk, right? So we might be real familiar with maybe like physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse in those terms. But what that power and control wheel does is it says, well, let's get a little bit more specific. What kinds of behaviors are we talking about, right? That's where we start getting into the like hitting, pushing, punching, shoving, kicking, slapping, strangulation, kind of like behavior, right? We got to start naming them real specifically, okay? So if you work from the center and you go out, you'll see that gray kind of ring there. Again, that's when we start looking at real specific kinds of behaviors, right? It says choking on there, man, but sometimes we use the word choking and strangulation like interchangeably, right? Like we use them to mean the same thing, but there's a difference between the two, man. And I just want to ask folks here, what's the difference between choking and strangulation? Let me get this right here. Jonathan?
So choking would be like choking on like food. Okay. Strangulation would be blocking the airways or stopping the circulation.
Very good, man. Appreciate it, Jonathan, right? Yeah, choking is an internal blockage of the airway. Okay? So if I'm eating a piece of food or something, internal blockage of the airway is choking. External blockage of the airway, right, is strangulation. Okay, so that's, what's that?
That would be by force, right?
Yep. So that could look a bunch of different ways, right? Like I might think about hands around the neck. I might think about like a forearm around the neck. I might think about getting like an object and placing it over that person's face so they can't breathe. I can even think about kind of like sitting on somebody's chest, man, so where they can't breathe, right? Like I'm preventing that person from doing that. So choking, strangulation, sometimes we use it interchangeably, but strangling is external blockage of the airway. So if I think about like being accountable for like choices I make, right? If I know that I've done that, get real comfortable with using that word strangulation, okay? Because that's what it is, it's not choking, right? All right, so we start seeing those kinds of behaviors, right? And we think about physical abuse, the larger outer ring, man, that black ring there, that's the big terms that we're pretty familiar with, right? And when we think about physical abuse, we think about all of the behaviors that come to mind for us, man. Pushing, shoving, punching, kicking, strangling, all those kinds of behaviors. And we think about putting our hands on somebody, right? And yes, all of those behaviors that include putting our hands on somebody, we would classify that stuff as physical abuse. But I want us to stretch and go a little bit further than that, right? I want us to think about physical abuse as like, what are the ways that we can use our body, right, to get somebody to do something or stop doing something without actually touching them? Okay? So we were going to think about it in that way. How can we use our bodies to get somebody to do something or stop doing something without actually touching them? Like, what other behaviors or things would come to mind for us, man?
There's lots of them. Tone of voice, the way you talk to somebody, the way you stand, and like body positioning.
Okay. Like, go body positioning how?
Like intimidation, basically. We all know you can be intimidating to somebody just by body posture.
Okay, very good, right? So I might think about kind of like going up on somebody, right? Sometimes it might be like I'm closing the distance and I'm standing over somebody and I'm kind of getting in their space like that, right? I might not necessarily be touching that person, but I'm using my body in a way where it's like intimidating, right? Like gentleman over here was saying, right? What other kinds of ways can you think about it?
I think
Can you stand up for me, please?
Being aggressive, tone of your voice.
Okay, very good, man. Right, thank you. When I think of like aggression, right, I think about behavior. Somebody else got something? You stand up.
Facial expression.
Okay, so I'm thinking about like my body and what my body's doing. Yeah. What else are you thinking about? You stand up for me, please. Say your name for me.
You can pretty much just use body language by pointing fingers, get out of here pretty much, right?
Yeah, thinking about like the gestures, right? Like hand gestures kind of stuff, right? I also think about like maybe destroying things, right? So here I am, man, and I'm over here like knocking holes in the wall and I'm kicking stuff and flipping stuff over, man, and I'm not touching you, right? But like I'm destroying everything kind of in the vicinity there. Like thinking about using my body in that kind of way. Right, maybe it's even using my body to kind of block somebody from going somewhere, right? So here's the hallway or the door or whatever, and I'm kind of putting my body there and preventing that person from like leaving, right? I'm thinking about those kinds of things too, right? You got something else for me?
Yeah, how you say it, like the words you use,
okay.
Like cussing, like if you're just saying something normal, then it's different from like, you may have to be close to you to be at a distance, but the way that you're saying it, like shut the fuck up or sit the fuck down, or like, I mean, it's the way that you say it. That could be instead of physical touch.
A lot of different kinds of examples, right, James? So one of the things that I want us to think about, right, when we think of physical abuse, yes, right, all of those behaviors that come to mind, right? Pushing, punching, shoving, kicking, strangling, all those kinds of behaviors, right? But there's some other ways that we can use our body too that can be pretty like risky and harmful to folks, right? And all the kinds of stuff that people are thinking of. So I want us to kind of just broaden our awareness about that. Okay? There's also something on there, man, where it says like sexual abuse, right? So when I say sexual abuse, what's the behavior that comes to mind for folks? Right? What comes to mind? What are we thinking about? You stand up for me,
Molestation, raping, stuff like that.
For sure, right? Yeah, I think about, when I hear sexual abuse, I think about overtly forcing sex on somebody, and we say rape, right? That's generally the thing that comes to mind, right? But just like physical abuse, right, and it's a broad range of behaviors, when we talk about sexual abuse, there's also a broad range of behaviors too, right, that come to mind for us. It's not only overtly forcing sex on somebody, even though it includes that, there can be other things too, right? So what would those other behaviors be, man, that we would identify as like sexual abuse in addition to overtly forcing sex on somebody? Let me get this joke.
I was just gonna say, like, saying things to them and like making them like uncomfortable by like how you're saying it, like saying like sexual things towards them, that could be sexual abuse.
Yeah, right. Maybe like the unwanted kind of like sexual attention and sexual innuendo kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like I'm alluding to, right? Like in my language and what I'm doing or saying, that can be one. What else do you think? Hey, stand up for it.
Like catcalling them.
Yeah, right. Anybody know what catcalling is? Yeah. Some folks know. What's catcalling, man? There's some folks that maybe they don't know.
Whistling.
Yeah, right. Like the unwanted sexual attention, right? The kind of whistling, right? Like the gawking kind of at somebody, right? You think about like being in the gym, man, and there's a girl working out, and this dude's over here like this, right? Like unwanted sexual attention, right? Like we're thinking about those kinds of things, right? That's when we say kind of maybe catcalling, right? Unwanted sexual attention. Right? What else can I think of? Is there anything else we should include in that? Stand up, please.
It can also include like sexual harassment.
Yeah, like give me an example of that. What would that be?
Pretty much like, over and over, or pretty much presenting yourself to at a party, on one place. So it can be verbally or physically.
Yeah, very good, right? So like, you think about, making an advance on somebody, right? And like that person not being receptive to that, and then just like the pressuring, right? Over and over and over and over again, like that kind of behavior, right? Very good. So a lot of different kinds of behaviors, man, that we're talking about, right? And I want us to think about that too, right? Is like stretching ourselves, not only we think about physical abuse, but like sexual abuse. So when we think about sexual abuse, I want us to consider something here. So this didn't play out in the video, but I want us to imagine that it did happen, okay? So do you remember the piece there where Mitch, punches Slim and he's like, leaving, he comes back, who you calling? Your mom loves a crazy thing, I refuse to live without you, like that whole piece. And then like Mitch leaves, right? So let's imagine like Mitch leaves, Slim is there, she kind of gathers herself, she goes upstairs, jumps into bed. Mitch comes back home, all right? Maybe it's later that night, a few hours, whatever the case is. But Mitch comes home and Mitch goes upstairs and Mitch decides that he wants to have sex. So that Mitch gets into the bed, right? He rolls over on Slim, he has an orgasm, he rolls over and he goes to sleep. Okay, so just picture that scenario. Okay? So, is that rape? And there's a couple ways we can answer that. Now we can say yes it is, we can say no it's not, or we might say like I need more information. Okay? So just imagine that scenario there, and if I say is that rape, how many people say like yeah it is? A couple folks. How many folks say like no it's not? Maybe nobody. How many people say like I need more information? Majority of us, right? So those of us with our hands in the air, right? What information do you need to know in order to decide like if that was rape or not? What do we think? Let me get this done right.
Did she consent to it?
Okay.
Because like didn't say if she said no, I don't feel like it, or so basically she consented to it.
Okay, so James is saying like, did Slim consent to that, right? If I knew that, then I could decide if that was rape or not, okay? Right, what else? What other information do you need?
Not only just like if she consented, like, did she partake, what was her body language, like if she was involved in it, did she want it, like, certain things like that, because, you can't just say, oh, this dude raped this girl, and, or this girl raped this guy, and, something like that without having, proof about it or something like that, like someone saying, hey, I did not want these sexual advances towards me, and this person forced me to do this and that, then yeah, that's definitely rape.
Okay. So Leonard, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Leonard saying, like, was Slim like reciprocating, right?
Yeah.
Like if Mitch was making advances, was Slim reciprocating like to that? Like that information would be helpful, right? If I knew that was the case, or if I knew whether or not like Slim was like clearly like not reciprocating and didn't want that kind of attention, then like I could decide if that was rape or not. Right? Okay. What else do we need? Or what other information might we need to know?
Well, for me, when you're married, a husband can't rape his wife. So the information I would need to know is, are they separated? Are they getting divorced at this point in time? Because if they're still actively married, that's her responsibility to please him sexually that's by law. So for me, are they at the cusp of wanting to separate a sheet, saying, okay, I don't want to be with you no more at this time, or is it still fresh? You know what I mean? Because it can be, he can, you know, it is unwanted behavior, but it's not rape. You know what I mean? To me.
Okay, so what information do I need to know in order to decide if that was rape or not?
Are they getting separated? Are they breaking up? Are they at the point of termination?
Okay, so what I hear you saying is that rape or not? And like the information I would need to know is, are they separated? Are they still married? Like what's the kind of status of them like in the relationship? And if I knew that information, then I would be able to decide if that was rape or not. Like I hear that Gerald saying that. Okay. Right. What else? You got something else with that?
I'm sorry, I just started.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, and I'm trying to be completely respectful about the gentleman that just was talking. The marital status of the relationship. I mean, there is such thing that's called marital rape. You can't be married. You can't be raped by your husband. You can't be raped by your spouse, regardless of if y'all are separated, divorced, getting divorced, anything like that. There's no legal obligation by a wife that says that she has to provide her husband's sexual needs at all at any given time. Okay. I mean that completely respectfully as much as possible. I mean, my perspective, and there might be some legal backing to it, but there is a such thing as marital rape.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right? And we were gonna touch base on that, right? Yeah, but I appreciate you saying that now, right? Yeah, because we're thinking about like this scenario with Mitch, right? Is that rape or not, right? And everybody here kind of saying, well, maybe I need some more information, right? But some of us were clearly saying like, yeah, it was, right? And for those of us that said, yeah, it was, like, why was that rape based on the information we had? Like, why would you raise your hand and say, yes, it was? We get to jump right.
Well, one, they were fighting already before he left. And two, like, I mean, you don't really know what the situation was when they came back, how he was and how she was. And if they were still on good terms or bad terms. But even then, at that point, he never said that he asked, he just rolled over and just pretty much took it. So,
okay. Yeah, very
anyway,
good.
it's pretty much it.
Very good. I hear that, Sean, right? You got something else for me? Like, why was that rape?
The intimidation, there's the consequences that might happen if she did it.
Yeah.
What he wanted.
Yeah, and I hear that piece too, right? It's like maybe you want, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, you know, some folks said like consent, right? Like, hey, was Slim like, did she consent to that? Was there a willingness there? Was she reciprocating? Like, I hear all that piece, right? And then the things that I hear, like Deshaun and Juan Spot speaking to is this piece around, like, well, what kind of condition was Slim in? Like, there's this intimidation kind of like factor, right? So I want us to think about something when it comes to like consent, right? When I think about consent, in order for consent to be possible, there needs to be two options. There needs to be an all the way yes and an all the way no, right? And for somebody who's experienced violence in their lives or in their relationship, sometimes no might not be an answer, right? And that's kind of the stuff that Deshaun and Juan are talking about, right? And like, no might not be an answer because when somebody's intimidated, they often feel what? Afraid, right? There's fear there for that person, right? Like, if somebody is fearful of saying no, well, then there's not an all the way no available for them, right? Yeah, man, so like that really matters, right? When we think about consent, sometimes we think about consent as like, well, it's like, that's her right, man. She can say yes, she can say no, that's on her, right? But you can see kind of like what Mitch is doing is he's, based on his choices and his behavior, he's kind of taking no away, right? And that's a very different way of thinking about consent, right? Consent, we often put like on Smith in this scenario, but really consent is like, is Mitch affording consent, right? Is he making an all the way no and an all the way yes possible based on his choices? And like, probably not, right? And that's a very different way of thinking about consent. It's a very different way that I know, like how I was socialized to sex, right? I wasn't socialized to sex in a way where we say, you know what, man, ensure the physical, emotional, psychological safety of your sex partners. That's not the education I got about sex, right? Leonard kind of laughing because he probably didn't get that kind of education either, right? The education that I got was like expectations for sex, right? And kind of turning no's into yeses. That's called game, when we do that, right? And like expectation for sex, what I would say is like, here I am, here's, let's say, here's Larry right here, right? I'm saying, hey man, I'm gonna go out and, you know, I have a date later on, whatever the case is, this person I just met, whatever, right? I go off, I have this date, and I come back, I'm showing up with my boys. What are my boys gonna ask me?
Did you get it?
Yes, here we go, man, right? Like, they're letting me know, right, like what the expectation is that they have with me, right? So what if I come back and I'm like, nah, man, it was totally cool, right? Went out, she's a great person, she works at a good job, all that stuff, we had a good time. What do they tell me, man?
Did you hear it? Ain't got no game.
Yeah, right? There's that kind of ridicule that comes towards me, right? Some people say like, oh, busting balls, busting chops, ridicule, shame, right? And sometimes that ridicule and shame is a way to kind of police me, right? Let me know like what's expected of me and whether I'm meeting those expectations or like, really like punishment, man. You're not meeting those expectations, right? Like that's kind of the way that we often like, that's the way I've been socialized to sex. And a lot of people in here just kind of nod in their heads because they're like familiar with it, right? So even if that wasn't like your individual experience, right? If that never happened with Gabriel, like you have familiarity enough to know that that like exists and that's out there, right? So like how is that for us as men that you got all these different men in here, man, different experiences, backgrounds, all that kind of stuff. Like we all know that, right? Like there's something about the way that we're socialized to sex where all of us different dudes that are in here have that same kind of knowledge, right? So that speaks a little bit more broadly to how we're taught about sex. And just like we're taught that, right? About the expectation, about the ridicule and shame, about like not meeting those expectations, like women know that too, right? Like we're not just socialized in this like silo, man, by ourselves. Like they know that too, right? They know that men are taught to have expectations for sex, and they know that men also try to find their way around any kind of no, right? And that's why you got women, man, that like when they go to the bar, they gotta be like, hey man, watch my drink, right? Like that happens, right? You're gonna go somewhere, it's like, hey, I can't go by myself, I gotta take some people with me, right? Like they know that too, man, and they're having to like combat against that. So when we think about that kind of socialization in sex, it creates a lot of risk for like us, right? And it creates a lot of risk for like women and girls that are out there too. And that's wild to think about it in that way, man. So instead of like teaching or reinforcing for one another expectations for sex and turning those into yeses, right? The way that we do, right? Like we can teach and reinforce something else, right? And that other thing might be about like making sure that the choices that I'm making are affording a potential sex partner and all the way yes and then all the way no, right? Instead of like making choices that like take that no away from that person. So when I think about turning no's into yeses, man, right? And like how I navigate around any kind of resistance, right? Like how might I do that? What would be some ways to do that?
Persuasion.
Yeah, right. Maybe like telling somebody something that I think they want to hear, right? In order to like turn that no into a yes. Yeah. That's called game, right? That's in the game category, man. It's doing that, right?
It's kind of like manipulating the whole situation, like, you know what I mean, to your advantage, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes that's just like, that's how we relate to sex. That's how we get sex, right? That's like a very normal thing, right? Persuading, letting somebody know something that they want to hear, because I think if they hear the thing they want to hear, like maybe I'll smash, right? Like that happens, right? You say kind of manipulating the situation. Sometimes it's like in the situation with Mitch and Slim, maybe it's even like, hey, if I don't get it from you, I'll go get it from somebody else, right? Like threatening infidelity and that kind of thing, right? And maybe like for Slim in that case, right, we already know is like experiencing like Mitch's infidelity, right? And like that's emotionally like harmful, right? While threatening infidelity is like, well, I'd rather not that happen, right? So like, is no really an option? No, it's not an option, because if I say no, I know he's gonna cheat on me. He's been cheating, right? And like that's there too, right? So again, Mitch's infidelity is kind of taking that no away from us. In addition to like physical violence and punching her in the face and doing all that kind of stuff, right? So that whole kind of game, man, that like happens, sometimes that's just like normal sexual behavior. That's how we like get into relationships. That's how we hook up. That's how we do things, right? And how normalized that is for us. And again, we can choose to teach and reinforce that, or we can choose to like do it different. And if we did, we would have to take the responsibility on ourselves of like teaching and reinforcing something different. We have to take on the responsibility of policing our behavior to make sure that we're not doing things that are on that wheel that are taking those away from like our potential sex partners. So one of the ways I know that I can turn no into a yes maybe is lying. Right? it seems real simple, man, real basic, but hey, it works, right? Like, are you married? No, I'm not married, right? Are you married? Yeah, but you know, we're separated, right? You married? Yeah, we're getting a divorce though, right? Like all that kind of stuff, right? That's the way I can take the no away, right? If I gave all of that information, I say, you know what? No, I'm not. Yes, I am married. No, we're not getting divorced. I live at home and I got a couple kids, right? Been married for 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case is. And I'm being really honest about like all that information. Maybe that person chooses not to have sex with me, right? If I'm doing that, right? But that's not like navigating around any kind of no, right? Sometimes they're lying, the game, all that kind of stuff. Right? So again, we can choose to teach and reinforce that stuff, man, or we can choose to do it different. And if we choose to do it different, then maybe the people that we're having sex with are going to be like a lot safer for it, right? And then we can be a lot safer for it too. Cool. You got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, because I heard the piece, right? Like, Gerald, man, you're talking about, you know, in my opinion, like, if like a woman is is married and they're not separating, then, like, therefore it's, like, her responsibility, right? I hear that, and I also hear what Alan's saying, man, is like, I think there's, like, legal precedence there that's, like, marital, right? And I think, like, the thing that Chris is talking about, man, about, like, how we're taught and reinforced to expect sex as men, like, we don't just teach that to each other, but it's also built into a lot of the institutions in our system, right? One of those is marriage. And so, like, just a few decades ago, it was literally, it was not possible to rape your wife you were married to. And that's because, in the eyes of the law, like, your wife is your property as a man, right? And so, these beliefs, right, this like male expectation to sex is built into a lot of the stuff that we're like talking about, right? And so when we're thinking about like law, legal, right, like all of that, that might not actually like give us insight into like what is like right and wrong, right? So I just want to like put that out there for us to consider. So I'm going to transition the script, is that okay? All right. So we've been talking about a lot today, y'all. We've been talking about different types of violent and controlling behaviors, how we see misusing them, what they are, and that power and control wheel. We've been talking about experiences of our own in our childhood, how we maybe got to where we're at right now, right? And so now what I want to talk about is an idea of accountability. Anyone heard that word, accountability? Yeah? What does accountability mean to y'all? Anyone have a quick example? Yeah.
Taking owner of your
Can I
actions.
just stand up for a moment?
Taking owner of your actions, please.
Okay. Yeah. I hear you, Rowan. Yeah, so like taking ownership of our actions. Yeah. And that, for us, man, is like really what we're talking about when we say accountability. And it's like the ability for me to acknowledge harm that I've caused, take ownership and responsibility for the way that I caused it and the impact that it had, and maybe to make some kind of commitment to change and not do that again. Right? That is the beginning of change process for ourselves. Right? And that is often the hardest thing for us to do as men. Maybe when we were little boys, taking ownership and responsibility for something meant that we like opened ourselves up to violence and ridicule and shame. Maybe from our dads. Are you fucking stupid? Are you serious? Maybe it was something we got if we tried to be accountable and honest about a mistake we made. Maybe not. I don't know. Right? But there's a lot of training we get about how to not be accountable as men. Right? To not go into it too much. Right? And we can even just picture, like those of us that shared those experiences when we were little boys, could we picture our dads or that man in our life being accountable to us about their choices in that incident? Being truthful and honest about like what they did wrong, an apology and the commitment to do it different next time. Maybe not. Right? And so we don't get that training, and what we use in the work that we do, we use a script to kind of help us out with this. Right? So the script is, my name is blank. The name of the person I have used is blank. The behavior I used is blank. When I blank. Right? So let's talk about each portion of this. My name is blank. Right? So my name is Javi. This portion here, it's not some like broad statement about the world. I'm not saying like men in general, sometimes men do this thing, right? It's a common thing that as men, right, I'm not doing any of that. I'm attaching my name to what I'm about to say. This is me. The name of the person I abuse is. Sometimes we don't acknowledge the names of the people that we've harmed. And what that does, when we don't acknowledge the names of people, when we take away their names, we dehumanize them. Right? So we think about, like, as humans, the first way that we commit violence against someone is by dehumanizing someone. If you look at, like, when this country goes to war with other countries, soldiers are trained to talk about the enemy, not as the group of people that they are, but as insects or monsters. The function of that is so that the soldiers can dehumanize them. It makes it easier to commit violence against them. Same thing if we look at like groups of people who are demonized. In this country, we will call entire groups of people not by their names, but by something dehumanizing. There's a function and purpose of that because it allows us as a society to commit violence against them or to not care about them. So for me as a man, if I don't call my partner Ellie, if I call her a bitch, a hoe, or even if I just say fiance, the wife, my old lady, sometimes what I'm doing is I am dehumanizing her in my eyes. And I'm making it easier to commit violence against her. So I'm attaching her name to this. The behavior I use is blank, right? So in this portion, what we're gonna do on that power and control wheel, remember how we starred the behaviors that we related to? So we're gonna pick a behavior that we starred. We're gonna say it right here. The behavior I use is physical abuse, or the behavior I use is intimidation, or coercion and threats. Or we're gonna pick one of those. We're gonna pick one, and then when I blank. So the when I blank, this is the really important part. This is where we say how we did the behavior that we chose. Sometimes this is the part, this is where it gets really hard. Because this is also the part where we want to say, because she was yelling at me, because she was in my face, because I was drunk. Right? We want to attach the because in here. So don't confuse the when I for the because. Right? So for example, the behavior I used is physical abuse. When I pushed her to the ground and she hit her head on the coffee table. Period. Notice the period. And the reason we're doing that, right, is if we imagine ourselves as little boys, when we hear the because, often that's the justification. And often that's not the part that we need to hear. The other person needs to hear, that's not the part that we ourselves need to hear ourselves saying, right? Because at the end of the day, we can't control anything else that anyone does. Literally, we cannot control a single thing that another person does. All we can control is our choices, right? So if we want to make change going forward, we have to focus on what it is that I'm doing. And the more specific I can be about how it is that I use that behavior, the more awareness I give myself for next time to not use that behavior. Make sense? Cool. So I've heard Chris say this before, man. It's simple, but it's not easy. So we're gonna practice it together. I'm gonna start us out here. So we can do this with like physical abuse, right? So I can put myself on the script. I can say my name is Javi. The name of the person I abused is Maria Inés. The behavior I used is physical abuse. When I stood outside of the bathroom and yelled at her that she has abandonment issues and refused to leave until she came out. Period. I can also do this for sexual abuse, right? I can say my name is Javi. The name of the person I abused is Maria Inés. The behavior I used is sexual abuse when I cheated on her with another person. Period. Chris, you want to try it out then?
My name is Chris. The name of the person I've used is Rosalia. The behavior I used was physical violence. When I slammed on the brakes of my truck, forcing me to stand to the dashboard.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah. So the behavior I used was physical violence when I slammed on the brakes, forcing her to hit her head on the dashboard of the truck, right? So very specific, And it's all about what Chris is doing. Right? We're not sharing the because all of the other stuff that was going on, right? We're just owning the piece of like what we're doing. So I'd like for us to practice. Who else would like to jump in here and practice using accountability skills? Go for it, man.
My name is Deshaun. The person I abused is Terry. The behavior I used is physical abuse when I pretty much pushed her away from the door and shot the door shut. And pretty much told her to stay where she was at.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you, Deshaun. That was a lot of leadership on your part, and you did it. You modeled it perfectly for us, man. I heard you say the name of the person I abused is Terry. The behavior I used is physical abuse when I pushed her and slammed the door in her face. Right? Thank you, Deshaun. I appreciate that, man. Who else would like to try this out? Right here, Kevin.
My name is Kevin. Name of the person I've used is King County Sheriff's Department. The behavior I used was self-defense when I was being attacked by the Sheriff's Department.
Okay. So, Kevin, let me ask you, man, is self-defense a behavior on that power and control wheel?
No, but that's my situation. It's not on here.
I hear you, brother, and I hear that that's your situation, and I'm also hearing that maybe you feel victimized about why you're in this room.
Absolutely.
And that's real, brother, and I want to acknowledge and validate that. And the thing that we're trying to do in this scenario is take responsibility for ways that we do acknowledge having used abusive and controlling behavior. It's all right if you're not in that place, but that's what we're trying to do, okay? Anyone want to try to like take accountability for our actions in this space? Alan.
My name is Alan. The name of the person I've used is Sandra. The behavior I use is physical abuse and intimidation when I grabbed her and shook her and screamed in her face, "Why would you just fuck with me?"
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate you, Max. A lot of leadership. I saw a bunch of hands go up. Juan?
My name is Juan. The name of the person I abuse is Sylvia. The behavior I use is intimidation when I kicked the hole through the door.
Thank you, brother. Back here, Matt. Eric?
My name is Eric. The name of the person I've used is Brittany. The behavior I use is intimidation. Go by a house and little woods all around it.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate you, man. John?
My name is Jonathan. The name of the person I've used is Sarah. The behavior I used is physical abuse when I elbowed her in the face and fractured her orbital something.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that, man. And I want us to notice, man, like, how does it feel when we're saying these words out loud for ourselves? Right? This isn't a way we're used to saying these things. I want to acknowledge and validate that. This is a very structured way we're asking each other to participate. Notice what it feels like to hear those words coming out of our mouth. Thank you, Jonathan. It's a lot of leadership, man. I saw another hand. Over here.
My name is Gabriel. The name of the person I used is Melissa. The behavior I used is isolation. When I took her car keys and didn't bring her out of the house.
Thank you. And then maybe one last one. Leonard?
My name is Leonard. The name of the person I abused is Brittany. The behavior I used was physical when I pushed her to the ground really hard.
Thank you, Leonard. I appreciate it. Yeah. So this is like practice, right? And maybe we're noticing for ourselves, like, shoot, that was hard, but also maybe we feel a little bit of relief in saying that out loud. Notice that, if that comes up for you, right? I know I can practice this all day, and this can be helpful. Sometimes if we're feeling really stuck, really caught up in a situation, an incident, doing this a few times can bring a lot of clarity for ourselves, just standing in the mirror, right? And the thing about it is, right, saying the behavior I use is physical abuse when I elbowed her in the face, fracturing her eye socket, is a lot different from saying when I hit her, right? It's a lot different. We allow ourselves to see the impact of our violence in ways that maybe we don't allow ourselves to see all the time. And that's important, y'all. So I want to thank you guys for taking leadership in that, because it's not easy to do. And sometimes we do this and like we don't want to do it, right? But the thing is, like, when we can participate and do this, we engage in a process that allows us to do something different next time. If we just get caught up in the ways that we feel victimized about something, we are going to continue to feel victimized. We are gonna continue to not see the places where we are in control and focus on the scenario around me. And I'm gonna view every single interaction I have that way. And then I go to Circle K and this dude was just popping off on me. He was just yelling. He was just going off. And I had to do something about it. I will view my life in that way. But if I can step back and see the choices I'm making, I give myself an opportunity to do it different. Anything you want to add, Chris, or anything?
Yeah. Before I move forward, man, it's, you know, the one thing I say is like another way that this is really helpful is because I'm not only identifying the behavior, but also I'm for myself, right? I'm exploring kind of how I use it, right? And like that's me. And if I were to do this like enough in my relationship, if I were to do this enough across the relationships that I've been in, I might start noticing like something where like stuff starts showing up over and over, right? So I think about maybe like name calling, right? That's a behavior on there. So the behavior I used was name calling when I call my partner a bitch, right? And then I did that for Rosalia, or I did that for Maria, or Ana, or Stephanie, or whoever. And it's like, wow, man, you know, maybe that's the thing that I bring to my relationships, right? Is that sometimes when I'm in a relationship, I name call my partners and I call my partner a bitch. You know? It's like, well, that's mine then, right? Like that's the thing that I'm doing, and that's the thing for me to look at. Those are those patterns of behavior that maybe create risk for people I'm in relationship with, right? To experience that. So if I do it enough, man, I'll start learning a whole lot about myself, right? But if this space is filled with like they did this and they did that, like I'll never see that for myself, right? So that's the risk, man. It's like I don't learn and grow when I don't do that, right? So I appreciate folks for doing that. All right, so a little bit of a transition here, man. I want to talk about choice, okay? So when I say choice, I often think about like options, right? Maybe I can go this route or I can go this route, right? I think of, when I say choice, maybe sometimes I also think about like consequence, right? If I go this route, then this thing is probably going to happen, and if I go this route, you know, that thing is probably going to happen, right? And all that to say is that the choices that we make like matter, right? And just like what Javi brought up earlier, man, is that, you know, I have the ability to be able to choose like what I do or how I act or how I respond to like certain situations, and the way that I choose to do that is going to matter for me, and it's also going to matter for like the people that are in my life or whoever this other person is, right? So we want to give a lot of attention to like the choices that we make. So a scenario that I want us to consider is maybe it's like payday Friday, okay? Getting off work, get a check, right? And maybe when I get that check, there's a little bit of extra something in there, right? If boss tells me like, hey, we're doing good this quarter, whatever, you know, there's a little extra bonus that we got in my paycheck, okay? And I don't know for you, but when I get money that I wasn't expecting, then that's like a good day. Is that a good day for anybody? Is anybody upset now when they get money that they weren't expecting? No, man, right? So if I get money that I wasn't expecting, all of a sudden if I'm down here, I'm like, I'm feeling pretty good, right? It's a good day right there. So let's say that, man, I got that paycheck and I think, you know, I'm going home, or I'm thinking about at home, you know, maybe things have been rough, like we haven't been doing okay, maybe we have been arguing and fighting and people just kind of mad at each other. I got this extra money, so I'm gonna try to do something nice, right? So, you know, there is this show that's going on, so I'm gonna buy these tickets to the show. Maybe I'll make some reservations because we're gonna go out and do this dinner, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's all good, right? So I'm happy about that, man. I'm excited about it. I jump in the truck, man, and I'm driving out of work. And then I'm driving, and let's say that as I'm going home, man, somebody cuts me off, right? And it's the kind of person that cuts you off, not just a little bit, but cuts you off where I gotta get into the shoulder, man. I slam on the brakes, there's dirt flying everywhere, all that kind of stuff. So there I am on the side of the road, man, and where I'm at in that moment, like, I have choices to make, right? So what are some choices that I can make, like sitting there on the side of the road, man, when this person just cut me off? What would be some choices that I have in front of me? Stand up.
Not do anything and just keep going on with your day.
Okay, I could do that. That's a choice, right? I can sit there and just kind of like get back on the road and go about my business. I could do that. I could do what else? You tell me right here.
Meditate.
You could meditate. I could sit at the side of the road and I could meditate. Yes, sir, I could, right? What else could I do?
You could reflect like when you make, man, did I do something wrong? Like make sure that you weren't in the wrong.
Yeah, for sure, right? Yeah, I mean, another thing I could do, man, I could jump on the road and go tailgate that dude, man, off the horn at him, right? And flip him off and do all that kind of stuff. I could do that too, right? And majority of dudes in here are like, yeah, right? Makes sense. All of those choices are on the table for me in that moment, right? And the choices that I make matter, right? So if I decide to jump on that road, man, and go track that person down and let them know, hey, you can't do that to me, right? Like, that choice is gonna have like a consequence, it's gonna mean something for me, right? The choice that I'm sitting there on the side of the road, I'm reflecting, I'm meditating, I'm doing all that kind of stuff, right? Like, I know, what's your name, brother?
Jarrell.
Jarrell, right? Like Jarrell meditating on the side of the road anytime something bad happens, right? Right? Meditating, reflecting, like I can do that, and that matters too, right? Because maybe that's the stuff that helps me get on the side, get on the road, and go back home, man. I got tickets, I got reservations, right? It matters. What's that? You could, right? So which choice is gonna help me get to what I really want to do? It's probably the meditating, reflecting, get back on the road and going about my business, right? Tailgating, you know, flipping somebody off, honking the horn, all that stuff. It's probably not moving me where I want to go, right? So the choices that I make matter, man. So let's say that I do that. I'm sitting there for a moment, maybe I'm picturing, what am I meditating on, man?
Movies.
Going to the movies,
Going
right?
out to eat.
Going out to eat, I'm picturing this good night, right? Maybe I'm meditating on that, right? I'm sitting there, take that deep breath maybe, and I jump on the road and I start driving home, man. So I do that, right? And I come back home and I say, I open the door and I say, you know what, babe, hey, I got this bonus, and I made some reservations and I got tickets. Like, get ready, let's go.
Where are we going?
We're gonna go out to eat, and we got this show.
And out to eat and the show, you got a bonus?
Yeah, it's crazy, I wasn't even expecting it.
How much was the bonus?
It was like $500.
That's great. We can pay the car bill. We've been behind on the car bill, and then we gotta
I mean, yeah, I know, but like I made these reservations and only got like an hour, so you gotta get
reservations, and now it's Christmas time. We gotta buy the kids gifts. What are you talking about?
I'm just trying to do something nice. Man.
Something nice. Something nice to be buying the kids some Christmas gifts.
Hey,
Everybody always do this.
Right now.
Fight with me. You always do things
Listen,
like
I just
this to
want to
me.
do something good.
And then I'm the bad guy. You know what? Good thing for me would be you stay right here.
If you don't want to go, you don't have to go.
No, you're not going either. We're staying right here. We're talking about this.
If you don't move, I'll move. Put the time out right now. So just kind of being in this moment, right? And maybe some of us can like relate to it in some kind of way. If you've ever been in a situation, man, where all of a sudden, like it's real hot right now, right? There's a lot of tension right there, and there's like a lot going on in this moment. And just like being on the side of the road, the choices that I make in this moment like matter too, right? But is meditating coming to mind for me in this moment? No. Some people are like, yeah, maybe not, right? The choices I make matter, right? And sometimes the situations that we're in, it's really difficult to make like effective choices, right? Because man, I'm in it right here, right? Like you can see it from the outside, I'm in this, right? But I do have the ability to be able to make choices in here that get me to a place where I want to be, right? Get me back to being okay, get me back to a place of being effective, but I gotta buy myself some time, okay? I got to be able to access all the areas of information that are available to me to help me figure out how to get back to being okay, like in this situation, right? Because this is sometimes where most of us are at, man. We're doing okay, there's something that happens, and then maybe we notice ourselves going here, right? Like Deshaun was talking about this earlier, right? Sometimes I lose it, man. I've got yell, scream here, I got really frustrated and upset, I storm out, I slam something, right? And then once that happens, and I'm on my journey back up here trying to be okay again, right? And then I'm just stuck like in this space right here, man. And sometimes the ways that we try to manage this and not go here is we just avoid all the stuff, man, right? So I don't go nowhere, I don't talk to nobody, I don't do nothing. Some of us are living really lonely, isolated, like kinds of lives, man, right? Because all the thing that we're trying to do is not get into the thing, so we don't go there so we can stay here, right? And that's a very like rigid way of living life, man. It's a very lonely, unfulfilling way of like living life, right? So instead of staying in that and trying to avoid our life, because where our life is at is relationships, work, people, activities, situations, all that stuff, we gotta buy ourselves some time. And we have parts in our brain back here, we have parts in our brain up here, that allow us to be able to access like information, to be able to buy ourselves some time to access the information, to get back to being okay, as opposed to doing something that we're gonna regret later on, okay? I gotta do it. I gotta buy myself some time. We also got parts of our brain back here, man, that get us to act without thinking. Okay? Those parts back here, people are probably familiar with that fight or flight kind of like thing, right? These parts of our brain say, hey, we don't have time to think about this, you just need to get going, right? And that's often like a survival thing that's there for us in situations that are like dangerous, okay? So when I think about, have you ever seen maybe like a video, man, or you see like a group of people walking and then one person takes off running and like everybody takes off running? You ever see that? Yeah. You don't need to know like what's going on back there, man. You just know that something different happened, right? And your brain is like, boom, go, right? And that's a natural thing that happens for us, man. Or maybe you see some videos where there's somebody standing like on an intersection, right? A corner of an intersection, and you see like a car crash and this car's coming straight for this person, right? And that person just kind of like locked up right there, and that car's like right past them, man, don't even hit them, right? Crashes, maybe seen something like that on TV. And you might be sitting there saying like, move, run, get out of the way, right? But your body's just sitting there kind of like, whoop, locked up, man. You're just frozen in that place, right? And that's because your brain is like getting you to do the thing in that situation that thing's gonna help you stay safe, right? And that's all well and good, man, but every situation that we're in is like not dangerous, right? But sometimes, like, especially like with trauma, right, that kind of happens for us because all those stories that people were sharing earlier, we're in situations that like are not safe for us, right? And that does some pretty wild rewiring like in our mind, right? Sometimes we might be in situations that we think are dangerous and like we're not dangerous. So I gotta access the other parts of my brain up here that help me get back to being okay like in these kinds of situations. Okay? So I have those parts of my brain up here, man, that allow me to think about two things at the same time, right? That allow me to like forecast into the future, right? Leonard right here can say, man, in 20 years, where's my 401k going to be? He can think about that in his brain, right? He can think about the future, right? Other animals, man, they don't have parts of their brain where that lets them do that stuff, right? Dogs aren't thinking about 10 years down the road, man, right? They're just like right here, right now. But you have parts of your brain that allow you to do that. And so we got to buy ourselves some time. Okay? So if we think about being in this situation here, and maybe this situation is like my partner blocking the door, right? This thing that was happening here right now. One area of information that we can check into there is called our thoughts. Okay? So our thoughts is like the stuff that's going on here in our mind, right? It's that internal dialogue, the self-talk, right? And my thoughts are the things that like help me make sense of the world, man. They like they help me make sense about myself, about other people in the world, and the way the world works, right? And when I'm in this situation right now, if you don't move, I'll move you. Like, what are the thoughts that are coming to mind for me, do you think, that are driving me towards making an aggressive choice? What am I thinking in this moment that's pushing me towards aggression?
Having control of the situation?
Yeah, like, hey man, I gotta get control of this, right? Like maybe that's the thought that's coming to mind for me, right? Maybe I'm thinking that. What else?
You could be feeling disrespected too.
Yeah, man, she's disrespecting me right here in this moment, right? I'm telling myself that's the thought that I'm having, right? I gotta get control of this. She's disrespecting me. And when I'm thinking all those things, that's where I get to this place of like, if you don't move, I'll move, right? Like it's driving me to make that aggressive choice. But again, man, I have control over how I think about things, okay? I got those parts of my brain that give me the ability to be able to do that. So if everybody here right now, man, if you were just to picture like a pink elephant in your mind, right? So picture a pink elephant, and then I say, okay, man, now think of a blue elephant, you can do that, man. Or you can say like, no, I'm gonna keep thinking about this pink elephant. You get the ability, you can choose how to do that, man. You control how you think about it. So if I'm in this place here where I'm thinking, you know, I gotta get control of this. She's disrespecting me right now. What would be the other thing that I think about that helps me get back to being okay in this situation? What else could that be?
You could kind of like think about your partner's point of view and, you know, the reality of things, you know, it's kind of true, you know, like, hey, you got bills to take care of. You shouldn't be trying to splurge on some unnecessary shit. So,
yeah, I could think about that, right? I could be like, you're disrespecting me, I gotta get control of this. So I can think, well, maybe my partner's is helping me remind me of something that I didn't think about, right? Maybe my partner's like, let me know about something that I ought to consider, or maybe I should like consider what it is that like she's saying in this moment. I could think that too, right? In this moment, right? And if I'm thinking those thoughts like, you know, maybe my partner's got a point here, or maybe I didn't think about this thing, right, this bill that was being brought up here. Okay, maybe there's a point to that, or maybe that thought helps me get back to being motivated. You get to choose how to do that.
Or it could get you sad too, because you're like, dang, I have plans on doing this and that, and, you know.
And that's the next piece that we're gonna go, right? Because I couldn't think that in this moment. When I'm in this moment though, sometimes some of us might even tell ourselves like, I wasn't even thinking, right? Like we say that kind of stuff, but I wasn't even thinking. I just like did this thing and I didn't think about it, right? So accessing how we think about stuff sometimes is like challenging for us, man, especially in really big moments like this, right? Because sometimes there's big feelings that are there for us, right? So this next area, man, that we check into is we call our emotions. Emotions. What's the difference between feelings and emotions? Now, we use those words sometimes interchangeably, but what's the difference between the two? Anybody? Let me get this gentleman back here.
Me?
Yeah.
So
Gio,
you
right?
want to know what's between a feeling and emotion?
What's the difference between the two?
So feelings like how I was saying earlier, like I was hurt or that, but emotion, that's like, well, emotion's like crying, right? That's an emotion, right?
I would say like emotion is the stuff that people see.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I forgot your name.
Modibo,
right? Thank you, Gio, right? But I mean, you're on that, right? You're on that point. Mo was saying it earlier, right? Is like the thing that people see, right? So when I'm sitting here in this situation, it's like, man, why do you always do this, right? What, you know, I'm just trying to do something nice for you. If you don't move, I'll move you. What do people see, man? What does that look like? Yeah, anger and aggression, right? You see the anger there, and it's like, man, when you're sitting over here, like, man, Chris looks pissed off, right? Like, that's what people see, but there could be other stuff that's there, right? And feelings is the stuff that's on the inside, man. Maybe the stuff that people can't see, right? And so the point that Leonard was making was like, man, you know, I've had plans of going out, and it's pretty clear that's not happening, right? What's a feeling there, man, that connects to that? I have plans of going out, man, and it's pretty clear that that's not happening. So how do I feel in response to that?
It's disappointment.
Yeah.
You put all of the, built yourself up with the hope and expectations and trying to do something that was going to be positive, and immediately when you come through the door, you met with something that was adverse or the polar opposite to what you had planned.
For sure. That disappointment, right? Does disappointment look like, if you don't move, I'll move you, bro? Nah, man, because no, that's what people see though, right? But sometimes I don't even know that that's going on with me, right? That's how disconnected we are sometimes, man, from the stuff that's going on the inside, right? But disappointed makes sense, man. I have plans, I was excited about it, right? The show, reservations, all that stuff, and it's pretty clear that that's not gonna happen. I feel disappointed about that. Yeah. Where's that piece that Mo was talking, or not Mo, but Leonard was talking about earlier when he said, well, damn, well, you know, maybe my partner's got a point about this, right? Maybe sometimes, maybe what that drives for me is like maybe feeling embarrassed, right? Oh man, I kind of got called out on this thing here that I wasn't thinking about, right? Or maybe I feel ashamed about that. Like, damn, I should have thought about that, right? So like there could be disappointment, there can be embarrassment, there can be shame. All of that stuff can be here like in this moment, right? But the thing that everybody sees and what my partner sees is like, if you don't move, I'll move. That's all that's happening there, right? So the thing that I need to do, man, is I need to identify, I need to acknowledge, I need to be able to express it. That's how I take care of that stuff. If I don't know that that's there for me, then I think it can never get taken care of. The only thing that is going to happen is it gets turned into anger and all this is happening, right? So I got to first of all identify that, hey, I'm having this feeling here. Maybe it's disappointment, right? Maybe it's embarrassment, maybe it's shame. I got to acknowledge it. Man, a feeling is just a broad continuum of different kinds of things, and I can feel disappointed in this situation just like I might feel angry or upset, right? And I got to express it. I might say, you know what? This is the way I do it here, man. I say, you know what? I have plans about going out, and it's pretty clear that it's not happening, and I feel disappointed about it. And I just took care of it, man. That's how I do it, right? People are like, I need to get into therapy, I need to go to counseling. Well, that's what they teach you how to do, man. You gotta identify it, you gotta express it, man. It's like, hey, you know, I feel disappointed because I wanted to go out here and it's pretty clear that that's like take care of my disappointment, you know? You know what, you know, I realize that like we have that bill and I didn't think about that, like I feel pretty ashamed about it. Take care of it, right? Man, I like to think that like I'm on top of like stuff here in the house and I forgot about that bill, like I feel embarrassed about that. I'm gonna take care of that, okay? And that's how I do it in the moment, man. And if I do that, maybe I get back to being okay, right? But that can be really hard too. Because sometimes we're not clued into or we're not cued into like our disappointment or our shame or embarrassment. We're just all in the, you don't move, I'll move you, right? Like you try to control me in this moment, right? Like, you're disrespecting me right now. Like we're stuck in that space, right? So another place that we go, man, is in our body. When my body's preparing to do something aggressive, like what's happening for me physically, man? What does it feel like? What are the sensations that are going on?
You start doing the anger starts building up.
Where do you feel it at?
Like in your stomach.
Okay, so maybe my stomach starts getting tight, right? Or maybe I get like a queasy feeling in my stomach. Okay, where else does it show up? When my body's preparing to do something aggressive. Blood pressure, right? Maybe that starts happening, right? Heart pounding a little bit. What else, man?
Hands sweating, start clenching your pit fist.
Yeah, man. Like you start noticing that tension, and maybe it shows up here in your hands, right? If you're gonna do something aggressive, maybe you start making those fists like that. Yeah. What else?
I used to clench your teeth.
Yeah.
Your jaws.
Right. You're clench down on your jaw, man. And it's really tight, and you're flexing out. You see your cheeks kind of blowing out here, man, because you're like hunting down on your teeth like that. Absolutely, right? Maybe I start. What else?
You start breathing like heavily, like you start like panting, like almost like a pant, like a rave, almost like.
Yeah, like I start panting sometimes, man. I don't even breathe, right? Because I can't get it out fast enough, right? Right? I don't even take a breath in that. So all of that's going on for me, right? So how do I intervene in my body, man, when all of that stuff's happening for me? What are some ways to do that? Yeah, right? Like if I notice that I'm breathing real shallow and I'm panting or I'm holding my breath, I can just be real intentional and focus on breathing, right? I can do that. It seems simple, man, but again, in these kinds of moments, I don't even think about it, right? But when I focus on my breath here, right, and breathing from down here in your belly, right, your diaphragm, that's the real effective way to bring oxygen into your blood. And when you have oxygenated blood, it causes a relaxation response in the body, right? So if I'm not breathing, I'm making it worse, right? If I focus on my breathing, I help create that relaxation response in my body. So I can do that, right? That can be one thing. What else? How else do I intervene in my body?
Walking away.
Walking away, okay, so like creating some distance, right? It can be that, right? So instead of like being in this really confrontational kind of space like this, man, maybe like I create some distance, right? I back up a little bit, that could be one, right? What else, man?
You got to change the tone of voice.
Yeah, man, if I notice that I'm out here like, maybe I'll be intentional about like bringing it down, right? More like level kind of tone, not yelling at the top of my voice, right? If I got my teeth clenched, right, like Mo was saying, hey, open your mouth up, man. Create some distance in between your teeth, right? If I got my fists clenched like this, I think Kevin was saying, be intentional about like opening your hands, like do the opposite of that, right? If I got tension like in my neck, man, and my shoulders, and I'm all bowled up doing one of these kinds of things, be intentional about like releasing those muscles, man. Right? You have a bicep, man, you can flex it. You can also be intentional about letting it go, right? Do that stuff in your body, man. And when you do that, just like a rubber band, your muscles, when you stretch it and they get really tight, right, you can also like relax it, okay? So be intentional about letting the tension out. If I'm pacing around, because that's going on right there, maybe I just like sit still, stop doing that, right? Maybe I sit down, maybe I open my jaw up, I let my hands out, start breathing. If I'm scowling at you, right, looking at Alan back here, man, if I'm all scrunched up here, relax your forehead, man, and let your face relax, right? And when you do those kinds of things, it creates that relaxation response in your body, and maybe that's the thing that helps you get back to like deep. Sometimes I don't work either, right? Because we're in it right here, right? So, like, if you don't move, I'll move you, man. You're disrespecting me, right? You're trying to control me. Everybody sees all the anger, man. Chris is angry and pissed off, right? My body's all tensed up here, man. I'm sitting here, I can't hold it anymore because I'm so tight in my body, right? Like, sometimes that's the way it feels, man, and we feel like we're out of control in that situation, right? Another area that we can check into, man, is in our spirit. So when I say spirit, man, what comes to mind for folks? What am I talking about?
Pretty much like your inside, like the way your mind thinks, like your like how I say, like your persona, like in a way.
Okay, yeah, man, it can be like the internal kind of like talk, dialogue, thoughts about how I see myself maybe, or like how I want to be in the world, right? Like that can be like some of that space for me, right? What else could it be?
Religion.
Yeah, it could be like our faith, man, right? Like that might be something that's there for us that we might be able to check back into, like in really difficult situations that help us get back to being okay, right? What else could it be?
Your conscience.
Like, let's talk about that a little bit more.
As far as like thinking what you're doing and where it's gonna take you.
Yeah, right. I'm kind of like sitting here, like I'm in the moment, and my conscience might be that thing that's kind of stepping outside of myself and saying like, man, look at you, right? Like, is this really where you want to go? Is this the thing that you want to do right now, right? So I'm kind of listening to that, right? I'm getting that kind of outside perspective from like myself, right? It's the Jiminy Cricket, man, in Pinocchio. Everybody see Pinocchio, man? That's what Jiminy Cricket is, man. He's Pinocchio's conscience, man. He's trying to tell, hey, man, he's trying to give him advice, right? Hey, you want to do this, you want to do that, right? So I'm sitting here and I'm kind of like looking at myself from the outside and I'm saying, like, man, is that really what you want to do right now? Right? Is that the thing you want to do? Is that the direction you want to go, or do you want to do something different? Listening to my conscience. What else? We get Jonathan, right?
You see spirit going hand in hand with like morals and values.
For sure,
Kind
right?
of checking in with your spirit, you know, like what do you want for yourself? What direction? What kind of person do you want to be?
Absolutely, man. Values are really good, man, because values are, you never really get there with values, right? So if I think of a value like integrity, right? So for me, integrity means doing the right thing when nobody's looking. I don't ever get there, right? I just got to make sure that I'm making the choices that are putting me in that lane, right? So like when you say values, it could be integrity, it could be family, it could be self-respect, it could be self-control, it could be whatever, right? Whatever it is for me that is important, it's like, if I do this thing right now, if you don't move, I'll move you. Am I going to be in line with what's important to me, or am I going to step outside of that by doing this thing, right? And I use that to kind of check myself, for sure. It might be somebody really important, man, that maybe you love or care about, right? I think about my grandmother and I say, man, if my grandma was here right now and she saw me doing this thing, would she be proud of me for that, or would she be upset with me for that? Right? Maybe it's somebody that I really like value or admire or respect, right? Maybe I say like, you know, Leonard is this guy, man, that I really look up to, man. He's somebody that's like on point, making decisions and all that stuff. Like if Leonard was in this situation, what would Leonard do, right? What would this other person do? I might use it in that kind of way, right? Yeah. So it could be somebody maybe that's important to me, that I care about, somebody I look up to. I'm kind of checking into that space there and saying, hey, is that the thing I'm going to do right now in line with that? Is that person going to be proud of me, right? Or am I going to make a choice that's like outside?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, sometimes it's just like a phrase or an affirmation, you know, like similar to a value, but just like a phrase. Like, well, I mean, I was seeing Lo's sweatshirt earlier today, man, when we first came in. I think, what does it say? Time is a currency we only spend once.
Mm-hmm.
I read that and that like hit me like a ton of bricks, man. Because I just had this thought last night, like my daughter is 1 year old already, and it feels like it went by in the blink of an eye, man. And I'm like, shoot, I've been like working and doing all this stuff, and my daughter's already 1 year old. I will never get that time back. And I was thinking, like, man, like in this moment here with my partner, maybe like what grounds me is like, I will never get this opportunity, this exact opportunity ever again. Like, what do I want from this? How do I want to show up? Like, how do I want to look back on this time? Like, that just like really grounded me, man. And so like I think about like affirmations I can say to myself in a moment. That's one of them. For me, time is a currency I can only spend once.
Sure.
Okay.
So if we buy ourselves time, man, and we're checking in with our thoughts, with our feelings, right? Kind of getting underneath what everybody's seeing, like what's going on in our body, and kind of checking in with that spirit space. That's all areas of information that if I choose to access, I might be able to intervene in and help me get back to being okay. Right? It's like tools that are there for us to do. And some of us have more access to certain areas than like others, right? So I think for me, like I can cue into like what's going on in my thoughts, right? I'm kind of in this space where it's like, I know how I'm thinking about this thing. I know that this thing that I'm thinking is a thought itself, right? And I know that this is like helpful or unhelpful for me. I can cue into that pretty readily, right? But maybe sometimes I need to go here a little bit more, man, because it's hard to really just name like what it is that I'm feeling in this moment, and then sometimes like being willing to acknowledge that I feel that way, right? Sometimes that's hard for me. Like I want to feed the anger and be pissed off, but I don't want to admit to myself that like I feel disappointed right now, right? So I got to go there and I got to build that for myself. And if I do, well, then it makes this arc of choice like more effective, a more effective tool for me. Okay? So just thinking about these different areas, I want to ask some folks, what do you think you have access to pretty readily? Like you know yourself and like what's a strength for you? And what's an area that you know you need to like really further develop for yourself in order to be able to make this tool, the arc of choice, like more effective for you? I wonder if anybody's got something for us.
The strength for me is my kids. Like, I always like to look towards them when I think about the decisions I'm gonna make in my life.
Would you put them in that spirit space right there?
Yeah.
Kind of thinking about my children, right, and what's good for them, okay? What's the area that you need to like further develop for yourself?
I would say, the thoughts.
Yeah. Kind of getting cued into what's going on here. Because sometimes, man, when we think about things, it's kind of like a rail car on the railway, man. We can latch onto a thought and then we're just down the track, right? And it's hard to challenge it sometimes, okay? So kind of going into that area and challenging and building that for myself, I hear James saying that, that can be more effective for me. Yeah, right. Yep. Overthinking things, really feeding the thoughts that we have, right, instead of challenging them. Good. What else?
That was the thought too, but I came across this book. I don't know if you know the 4 Agreements. 2 of the agreements kind of hit with me, like don't make assumptions and then also don't take things personal.
Okay.
So those 2 kind of like hit me really hard. So and I've got to work on the emotion part, but yeah.
Very good. Right. Yeah, right. Like getting, if I'm just noticing myself like, angry or upset, right, all the time, like, well, let me go a little bit further and say, what else is there for me? Okay? So I can build, sometimes our experiences, like, I know when I'm pissed off and I know when I'm not. And that's all we got, man. Right? We're just stuck in those 2 places. So it's like, okay, let me broaden that for myself a little bit. So I need to build that, right? Very good. Anybody else, man? You got something for me? Alan?
I think my strength is spirit.
Yeah.
Through therapy, I was told that, well, one biblical verse is a man is slow to anger and quick to listen. And a mantra that I was told to create for myself was my actions and reactions are my own responsibility. But my weakness tends to be my emotions because they end up flowing everything else and taking over, flowing out to my body and the anger. It's hard to come back and get mind, body, and spirit and then create that separation and get back to where I need to be to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Yeah, saying like, hey, sometimes here those emotions are really big, man, and it's hard to really like get into that, right? So like kind of building that for myself a little bit so I can implement the things that I need to in order to get back to being okay. I want to cue into that more, but I know that I can check in when it comes to my spirit. I can rely like on my faith. I can jump on it, right? That's always there for me. All right, very good. Anybody else, man? One more. Yeah, here, Sean.
Yeah, I'd say pretty much my spirit would be probably the biggest, like my strength and all and everything. Just, family wise and just like, pretty much like when I put my mind to something, I go for it. I don't just give up. Emotions would probably be, emotions and thoughts really go together one-on-one. Yeah. So they would probably be my downfall just because sometimes my thoughts turn to emotions and then my emotions sometimes turn to thoughts.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point, man, right? Is that sometimes the thoughts that I have, I can really feed them, right? Like with those feelings that are there for me, right? And kind of like that's vice versa. If I'm sitting here thinking like, this person's trying to control me, right? This person don't appreciate it and blah, blah, blah. Then I can start feeding some of that anger that's there for me. They kind of work hand in hand, right? But yeah, cueing into that space when it comes to like spirit, I know that that's always there for me. And as long as I check into that space, that's helpful for me to get back to being okay.
I think about like what you're saying, Deshaun, because emotions, right? Like they've studied emotions like scientifically, like what happens in your body. And I think there's it's like they're literally like time limited. But like when we feel an emotion or like a feeling, like it's about 90 seconds. And like we feel that and then it kind of just passes and then we're on to the next feeling, right? But when we're like, our thoughts reinforce things, that's when we like replicate it and we can double down, right? So I appreciate that connection of like, my thoughts influence my feelings influence my thoughts.
Absolutely. You know, like, kind of same, similar thing, you know, with our body. You know, they do studies, man, about people, you know, who are experiencing depression. And they say, you know, if you want to challenge your depression, like smile more. because they know the corners of your mouth, man. The corners of your mouth, if they're upturned, there's a lot of nerves in our face, man. And the nerves in our face are really receptive to like the facial expressions that we're making, right? I feel angry and I'm scowling, right? I'm smiling and I'm feeling happy, right? So when we are intentional about like changing our facial expressions, it can have a big play on our mood, right? Yeah, and our face is really susceptible to temperature change also, man, right? So if I'm feeling really hot, right, angry and upset, and I rapidly cool the temperature of my face, put my face in like ice water or something like that, it'll start forcing my body to like relax and calm down, right? So like all that kind of connection and how those things work together. All right, cool. So you want to make a quick transition here?
Sounds good, man.
All right.
So we're gonna just do a post test, just like we did right at the beginning of the workshop. We're getting close to wrapping up here, so we'll do this post test and then we'll have a brief conversation before we go. So again, this is anonymous. Don't put your name on it, and we're gonna walk through it together. So I'm gonna come down on the left side. If you could just hand it to the right. All right, so today's date, once again, you can write under the day, it says December 17th, 2022. Leave where it says post, just leave that blank, pencil. Okay, so it says, please circle the number. So please circle the number that best represents your answer to each question below. A, I have used abusive, controlling, or violent behaviors towards a woman. 1 for strongly disagree, 2 for disagree, 3 for unsure, 4 agree, 5 strongly agree. B, women provoke men to be abusive, controlling, or violent towards them. 1 strongly disagree, 2 disagree, 3 unsure, 4 agree, 5 strongly agree. C, I have the knowledge and skills I need in order to make non-abusive, non-controlling, and non-violent choices. 1 strongly disagree, 2 disagree, 3 unsure, 4 agree, or 5 strongly agree. D, from today's class, I have learned, please circle a number, from 0 to 10, ways to make non-abusive, non-controlling, and non-violent choices in my relationships. So circle a number, whatever fits best. E, this class has helped increase the knowledge and skills I need in order to make non-abusive, non-controlling, and non-violent choices. 1 strongly disagree, 2 disagree, 3 unsure, 4 agree, 5 strongly agree. So finish that up, hand it to your left, I'll come back and pick it up, and then we'll have a conversation. We're not leaving yet, we're gonna have a conversation first. Yep, sounds good. All right, y'all. So just some thoughts Chris and I wanted to share with you before we go today. The first thing is, this right here, as well as the accountability script and everything we talked about today, are just some tools, right? Now we have choices as to whether or not we use those tools in our lives, right? As Chris says, like if we're really committed to using these tools, we're gonna mess up. It's gonna take practice, right? So like using these tools means I gotta practice them and implement them if I wanna use them, right? So we gave y'all some supplemental like sheets, the arc of choice. If you took notes, you're welcome to take those sheets of paper with you. Those are yours. But I just want to say, y'all, like, we can identify all this stuff. We can walk through all of this stuff. But that's only if we choose to do that. And if sometimes I'm really committed to my thoughts, and when I'm really committed to my thoughts, I just got like my thoughts glasses on, right? That's how I'm choosing to view the world. And maybe, and just to use you as an example, Kevin, man, and I just want to use you an example because I think like probably it comes up for a lot of us, right? But I can choose to view why I landed on probation as like, that makes me the victim. I can think that way about it. And it may or may not be true. I don't know anyone's full life story, right? But are there also thoughts I can have to help me understand that a little bit differently? Maybe about like my choices around how I got to where I got. Right? And maybe that, thinking those thoughts, results in a different choice next time. Results in me ending up in different places next time. But I gotta choose to do that. Or I can just choose to live in that other thought. Right? And that's a choice I can make. So I really just want to appreciate everyone for how they showed up today. I think like, and you can tell me, Chris, but like when we did the accountability script, I don't think I've ever seen like so many dudes just like jump up, be like super willing to just like share about like, hey, like my name is like this, and like I've like abused in like these ways, and like here's the way I've done it. I don't think I've ever been in a DVO where like that many men just like couldn't get in line fast enough to just share. Right? And when we do that, that really matters. Right? Because what we can do, right, is like we can just show up and be like, I have not used any abusive behaviors, and then no one else in the space wants to say anything. Right? So y'all did that today. Y'all are the reason that that happened, not Chris or myself. Right? The way we show up in these spaces, the ways I'm willing to take responsibility and ownership of my junk, it gives permission for other men in this community who hear me, watch me doing that, to take leadership in doing the same thing, right? So some of us, we might be taking this workshop today, and from here, we're gonna be either, maybe we've already started classes, or we're gonna go and take classes now to wrap up our time on probation, or with city court, or whatever the requirements of us having received a domestic violence charge are. So one thing is, right, we have classes that you're welcome to sign up for. You can call us at our phone number, which is on the sheets that you've received from us. I went through our classes. It's a lot like this workshop, and we provide a lot more tools around like how we can engage in these conversations and our own violence, and then lead conversations with other men, right? You might choose to go into our classes. You might choose to go in other classes in the community. Wherever you go, the way that you show up in those classes really matters. You can go in those classes and you can drag your feet through them, right? Just like this morning, you could have shown up, you're mandated to be here, it's early on a Saturday, you could have dragged your feet through this whole workshop, but a lot of you didn't choose to do that. A lot of you chose to say like, man, I see people participating, this is resonating with me, I'm gonna speak the truth. And that mattered, right? So you can create that experience for other men in the classes that you go to by taking leadership, by standing up and being willing to be the first one to say something that no one else is willing to say. And that's what it's gonna take, back to all the way to the beginning, right? When we said male violence is gonna end when men decide it's gonna end. And only until then. Only until we stand up and say enough. We are hurting. We're hurting the women in our life. We're hurting the children in our life. Enough. I want it to be different. That's what it's going to require. So again, I just want to say, we have these conversations all over the place. Not just because y'all are on domestic violence probation. Not just because y'all got caught up in the legal system. These are conversations all men need to be having. I need these conversations every day of my life. When I can be in the conversation like we had today, I go home and I'm a better father and I'm a better partner because of it. So I need to stay close to spaces like this. So what I want to say is, and I'm sure Chris feels the same way, if y'all are out in the community, you see Chris or myself out in the grocery store or anywhere else, come up and say hi to us. We are other men in your life now. And just like maybe we shared some things today or other men shared things today that resonated with you, there's things that y'all shared today that really, really resonated with me. That quote, man, I'm not going to forget it. I promise you, I'm not going to forget it. I'm going to write that down or something. This all really matters, y'all. And so I just want to say, thank you. from like the bottom of my heart, thank you for the ways that y'all showed up, because it doesn't always go this way. Chris, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, and then just the only thing I would say, man, like Javi was mentioning earlier, this is a conversation for all men, and we know men that are in our lives probably that like should be talking about this stuff too, who are like never gonna get involved with the justice system, who might not be like in this kind of a meeting. But we got brothers, we got fathers, we got uncles, we got nephews, we got kids, right? Like all these kinds of things. And men teach boys how to be men, okay? So like share the conversation, man, and the more that we're doing that, the safer that we're gonna make it. So thank you guys for showing up and being here today. Appreciate you.
Thank you, brothers.
Congratulations. Thank you guys.
Probation might have some construction, but otherwise, thank you all.
All right, take your guys' bags, don't forget it.